It's been 6 months since Ron became a junior employee at a well-known company, and he considered this a great opportunity for himself. True, there was one significant disadvantage in his position in the form of colleagues who pushed them around in every possible way and dumped their robot on a new guy. Despite all this, Ron found the strength to smile at his senior colleagues, even if it weighed on him. For the umpteenth time in a day, he was in the restroom, but he never rested, accumulating fatigue and losing all motivation for his work, making coffee. He realized that he was simply being used, and working as an intern did not bring the proper effect. Unexpectedly for the main character, a beautiful girl turned out to be next to him, who was noticeably kinder to him than his colleagues. Linda took care of Ron from the moment of his internship, since they studied at the same university and was older than him. During the conversation, the guy awkwardly held a cup of coffee, and it spilled on his hand, causing bright pain, and slipped out of his hand. This greatly puzzled Linda, and she immediately offered her help. Ron was at a loss and did not want to inconvenience his senior colleague, but she insisted on her help, and he could not resist. The only thing that confused the main character was the open forms of Linda's dress, and because she was too close, Ron could not take his eyes off her beautiful body. At this moment, the dissatisfied voice of the boss was heard behind, who asked the main character to distribute gifts to the departments where the employees worked. Ron had to object that this was not his job, to which the boss replied that this was a kind of tour of the departments for familiarization. Linda noticed some tension between the two men and volunteered to help Ron, to which she received the good advice of the boss not to worry about such a trifle, and that the intern could handle himself. Realizing that she could not help in any way, Linda promised the main character a walk together, which in turn made the guy very happy. When she left, the boss, without hiding his mockery, shamelessly threw a bag of gifts in Ron's face, which of course he could not have expected. As a result, the package fell to the floor and small, well-packed goodies rolled out of it in a scattering. The boss clearly did not like it, and without hiding his disgust, he scolded the intern for a mistake and told him to take his time and collect everything. While Ron was slowly putting the boxes back into the bag, the boss watched and entertained the thought that the main character would forever grovel in front of him. When the intern finished, the boss left with a very pleased face, from which Ron realized that this was not a simple attitude of the chief to the subordinate, but certainly a mockery of him. Suddenly, Ron's phone rang in his pocket, and reacting to this, he looked at what it could be. The phone had an advertisement for a mobile game with a very interesting context, from which the main character first fell into a stupor, but then decided to download this game and see what it is. And at the moment when the guy pressed the download button, a golden glow began to emanate from the phone screen, which began to envelop him. Not expecting this, Ron was immediately pulled into the portal and spit out clearly not where he was before. Some noise unknown to his hearing before that attracted his attention, and he turned around to make sure that there was no something incomprehensible behind his back. And what was his surprise when behind the metal mesh he saw a crowd of disgusting creatures that somehow resembled people, only with unusually scary faces. Since such creatures can often be seen in movies or games, Ron immediately guessed that these are real zombies, and they are a couple of meters away from him, and the only barrier between them is this squishy grid. At some point, the main character saw a scoreboard in front of him with information that he could move between his world and the world of the apocalypse. This information board prevented him from noticing that there was a gap in the only barrier between him and the zombie. Instantly realizing that it was time to leave, Ron grabbed the gift box and rushed in the opposite direction from all this. In desperation, he ran without looking back with all his might and tried to call anyone for help. There was a shout behind him, urging him to duck, and turning around, the guy saw a girl with a couple of grenades, which she threw into the crowd of the dead. A second later, she landed between the zombie and the guy, and there was not a small explosion against which Ron's savior was located. After thanking her, she said that she was a hunter, and it was just her job, and the main character helped in solving some problems. Since Ron didn't have any money, he decided to offer her a yummy present as payment for saving her. To the surprise of the main character, the girl did not know what it was, but she accepted this strange edible object and even decided to try it. She just lost her senses from the taste of this delicacy, and it seemed that in her life she had never eaten anything tastier than this. After a small meal, she gave the guy a fee for this delicacy, saying that such a thing could not be eaten for free, and this payment turned out to be not a little gold. On this note, she began to leave and said that her name was Lena, and if she was lucky, they would be able to see each other again. After a short journey, Ron came across a settlement that was a commercial one, and it looked, to put it mildly, contrasting against the background of multi-story buildings. The main character immediately started selling his treats, because he realized that he could earn money on this. It turned out that they only heard about this delicacy from their older relatives who lived before the apocalypse, and everyone was interested in it. When the main character was asked how much such a treat costs, he answered without thinking twice that it would cost 1 gram of gold for 1 gram of the product. Such a price greatly angered the local inhabitants, and Ron heard that no one could afford to buy such a thing for such money. To these objections, the guy calmly explained this cost in words, saying that no one knows how long he will live, but it's always worth trying something new and delicious. This meaning was caught by one of those present, and confirming the words of the main character, bought 50 grams of goodies for tasting. Behind the stranger's back, dissatisfied exclamations were immediately heard that the mercenaries were too rich and could afford more than others. The mercenary, accustomed to eating anything for survival, had already forgotten what delicious food was, and was over the moon from the combination of taste in his mouth. After the test, he immediately asked to sell him 2 more halves of the delicacy, but with different flavors, offering 100 grams of gold for them. Meanwhile, the rest of those present realized that they were missing something extremely tasty and began demanding to sell them at least 10 grams of treats. Everyone liked the taste of this unusual something, and they enjoyed the shares of this delicious moment with undisguised delight. Night fell imperceptibly, and Ron really liked to look at the bag of gold that he was able to earn in just 1 day. Such a prospect not only lifted the mood, but also increased the motivation for further sales, since the main character would be able to get his monthly salary in just a couple of months of such sales. And at the most joyous moment in his life, he felt something cold and sharp that rested on his side, and the call not to twitch. It was a typical robbery, from which he learned that a certain influential person was very much interested in him. Twitching in such a situation was almost suicide, but I didn't want to give away the honestly earned gold either, and Ron was trying hard to find a way out of this deplorable situation. Since he was only thinking about the robbery, he did not take into account that it could also be an attempt, which in fact turned out to be, and the killer admitted it without hesitation. And at the moment when the knife was already swung, the system reported that the ability to move between worlds had rolled back and it could be used again. The main character immediately accepted a request from the system for a refund, which is why the knife went through him. The killer, who did not expect such a turn of events, was in complete bewilderment and misunderstanding of what was happening, because he had never seen anything like it, and where could he see it? At the same time, Ron was lying on the couch in his room, sincerely glad that the recharge rolled back before he was killed. He was also glad that a few treats from his world cost a lot of money in another, as well as the rollback of the skill, which lasted only 12 hours. At work, the boss recalled the trainee's misconduct and said that the main character did not appreciate him a bit as the main one, and this was undoubtedly annoying. The stay in another world did not pass without a trace, and now Ron was able to refuse the boss, saying that he was not a courier and got a job in a company to develop skills. And immediately he had to refuse a senior colleague's request to make him coffee, given that it was said too familiarly. In turn, the senior colleague did not appreciate this act and painfully pricked the boss with words that he could not subordinate. The chief reacted calmly to this taunt, explaining the behavior of the youth to the ignorant, and turning towards Ron, he said that everything was not yet decided. The main character was met by Linda, and she was obviously surprised by his equanimity and determination. But he said that it was her merit, because she taught him this all the time, but he did not say that his confidence was because of the money he now had. Looking at his watch, he noticed that the time before the skill rollback had almost come, and soon he would experience the delights of another world again. Since he did not leave the coordinates, the transfer happened randomly, and Ron found himself in a flat area full of green grass. He had a heavy backpack on his shoulders in which he prudently put canned food, but he definitely did not understand where to go and where he was now. When suddenly someone put his hand on his shoulder without noticing anyone before, the main character decided to ask where to go and turned around. How much Matt broke out of him when he saw that it was a crowd of zombies, and without wasting a second he rushed from his place to another long run. But the backpack turned out to be too heavy and slowed Ron down a lot on the way to a bright future, and he needed to do something urgently. I couldn't think of anything better than opening canned food and throwing them at the feet of zombies as an offering, in case they stopped chasing him. And this trick worked. For a while, the zombies stopped and started trying canned food, which made it possible to run away from them a little further. In this adventure, the main character did not cost a small amount of canned food, but to be precise, half of his stocks, which was a serious loss for business. The zombies were approaching again, inexorably shortening the distance, and they did not like the offering due to the dissatisfied growl. Ron quickly realized that canned food would not satisfy them. They needed living human flesh, which means there was not much choice, and he decided to fight. Since a quick decision was required, the main character climbed into the system's scoreboard and began looking for an exchange of his valute for something useful, and this turned out to be combat skills that cost 100 points. One of the zombies had already bent down on him, making a terrible guttural growl, but it was too late. Ron, with lightning reaction, kicked the zombie in the stomach with a U-turn, leaving no chance for the body to stay on its feet. Now that he had a basic melee skill, he wasn't a bit afraid of these creatures, but on the contrary, he wanted to take out his anger on them for the damaged goods. He began to shred zombies with his bare hands, one by one, sparing no effort, while confidently owning his body and coordination. Considering how weak he was before getting this skill, Ron was pleasantly surprised, because now he could take down 3 zombies with his bare hands. Suddenly behind him, he heard the noise of an engine and praise for the show provided. The owners of the car introduced themselves as hunters and explained that they wanted to help after seeing the main character and a bunch of zombies, but were pleasantly surprised by what happened. This calm dialogue was interrupted by noise from the side, and this noise turned out to be a crowd of zombies, which was rapidly flying straight at people. The hunters reacted instantly and, hitting the clutch, shouted to Ron to get into the car, which he was undoubtedly happy about, in any case better than running away on his own 2 feet. Given the slowness of zombies in science fiction films, the real ones could give them a head start and compete with athletes in running speed. The main character was immediately provided with a firearm, and it was obviously automatic, reminding that cartridges are very expensive and it is advisable not to miss. The partner himself shot quite accurately and managed to hit the heads of dead bodies on the move, without much difficulty, which is what he expected from Ron. And it was clear to the hedgehog that marksmanship during the apocalypse was a very important and essential skill. For a moment, the main character remembered that he was from a peaceful era and could not use weapons and did not know how. Fortunately, the system also had such a skill. It was called basic mastery of weapons, and in this situation it came in handy no matter where better. After receiving such a useful skill, shooting did not seem to be something not natural or new, but was quite familiar, and Ron immediately took advantage of it. However, there was an unusual specimen among the zombies. It was noticeably different from the others, and it looks like the bullets did not take it. Despite the high survivability, he was unusually fast and quickly approached the car. After all, level 2 zombies are more dangerous than usual. While the passengers were deciding what to do with these zombies, he leveled off with the car and grabbed the hunter by the neck. After that, he jumped away from the car with the hunter in his hand and slammed him into the ground at full speed. This was accompanied by painful screams. After landing, the monster began to strangle his victim with outright bloodlust, which was clearly visible on his face. Ron, who was watching everything from the side, could not stand it and rushed to the hunter's aid, clearly realizing that a fight could not be avoided. At full speed, he crashed into the zombie with his knee, from which he let go of his hands and lost his balance. By inertia, his body was pulled to the side, and he fell. Wasting no time, the main character shoved the barrel of the machine gun right into his mouth and pulled the trigger. Hunters once again praised the kid for his strength and for being able to kill level 2 zombies with such ease. After the dialogue, the recovered hunter began to dig into the head of the killed mutant. The purpose of this act was not yet clear. At the end of this action, he took out a blue crystal and showed it to the main character, who had more questions than answers, and he was told about the importance of these crystals and what they could be. Despite the fact that it was far from a cheap crystal, the hunter handed it to Ron as payment for saving his life. The guy could not believe that he was so easily given such a valuable thing, and at the same time completely free of charge. The hunter explained that the crystal may be valuable, but the life saved is much more valuable, and his friend supported him. They showed white crystals and explained that they may not be so valuable, but they will be able to cover their expenses, which means that you should not worry. Ron immediately made several win-win conclusions for himself that being a hunter is a very lucrative occupation, albeit risky. The senior hunter put his hand on the shoulder of the main character and asked if he wanted to join them. The younger explained this by saying that this happens to the foreheads of newcomers who have at least some talents, to which the elder said that regardless of the answer, they can give Ron a ride to the nearest settlement. And so the car started off. They had to travel a long way to get to the nearest settlement. Along the way, the main character looked at his blue trophy and reflected on its value. It seemed to him that there was some energy in this crystal that could have an effect. In response to his thoughts, the system offered to exchange this crystal for glasses, which was a new surprise for Ron. He agreed to the exchange without hesitation, and at that moment the crystal began to divide into many small fragments and disappear into the depths of the screen. A sincere smile appeared on the main character's face when he saw the result of the exchange. The crystal cost like 100 grams of gold, which was a very good indicator. The system also offered its owner a new option, which mentioned the frequent use of items and the ability to expand the inventory by 1 square meter for 100 points. This was undoubtedly a good offer, and Ron accepted it. Meanwhile, the group drove up to the refugee camp, through which the road to the settlement passed. The place was as unpleasant as possible, but not because of the disgusting or something like that, but because of the unbearability of looking at starving people who need absolutely everything they can need. The main character saw a picture of a little girl standing in front of the car and begging to give her some food. It was obvious from her that she was severely emaciated and clearly in need of food, while it was all a child. It would seem that no one could refuse these innocent children's eyes, but a shot sounded, and blood gushed from the little body. She did not even understand what had happened. She was shot by the driver of this red car. With fierce hatred, he was already yelling at the lifeless body of the girl, "Don't you dare touch, get out of the way," and similar nonsense. Something clicked inside Ron with such force that anger had nowhere to go. Literally in a second, he hated this man with all his heart. However, a friend stopped him from the irreparable, explaining that in such a world they live, where life has no value and power rules everything. This girl was not killed in vain. She became a reminder to the main character that this world is radically different from his native one, and if he is weak, he will be killed. There was a security guard at the entrance to the settlement who checked vehicles and a pass to enter the settlement. He recognized the older hunter named Autumn, and a smile shone on his face. With interest, he asked about today's outing. Since the guard was in debt to Autumn, he asked him to make a pass for Ron, since he did not have one. The settlement was surprisingly large, had a huge fence with watchtowers around the perimeter, as well as a large number of various buildings. Here the paths of the hunters and the main character diverged, since their base was located elsewhere, and Ron thanked them for their help with the pass. The hunters drove on, and the guy waved after them. Now it was time to sell what he had come all this way for, of course. It was canned food, and he hoped to get a decent amount for them. On one side, a guy was selling a new SUV, loudly announcing a 70% discount, which was really generous for such a car. From another vague appearance, the type was pleased with alcohol, which was produced before the apocalypse for a lot of money. And while Ron was thinking about the serenity of this place, a suspicious and very frisky man blocked his view. This guy took the main character for a rich man and decided to sell him one of his machines, clearly hinting that the purchase would be worth it. However, the guy did not immediately realize that this was a merchant, and he indignantly asked if it was normal to rob in broad daylight, and even with a weapon. But realizing that he was not in danger, he still sincerely did not understand what the weapon had to do with him. It turned out that the merchant had a trained eye, and he immediately noticed the guy as he got out of the hunter's car. which led the merchant to think that perhaps the main character would need a weapon. Ron was surprised that the dealer was selling weapons and nothing else, which caused a misunderstanding of how much it was legal, but the seller reassured him, convincing him of full legality. Having dealt with the legality, the seller went on the offensive and gave a 20% discount on this machine, only 5 blue crystals, to which he heard a refusal. Then the seller asked if the main character could have gold since there are no blue crystals, to which he received the same answer. Without giving up, the seller offered an absolute deal for 200 potatoes, and even this was not crowned with success. After so many unsuccessful offers, his face changed, and instead of friendliness, dislike, and disgust for the poor buyer appeared. Only he didn't take into account that Ron had a trump card up his sleeve, which he hid in his inventory just in case. And at that moment, the main character could not be stopped. He was looking forward to seeing the face of this huckster when he opened the canned food. The smell alone began to drive the merchant crazy. Since it definitely smelled very tasty, there were no problems agreeing with the main character to exchange weapons for just 1 jar of this outlandish food. But as it turned out, the weapon was without ammunition, and it seemed strange to Ron, however. The dealer explained that the trade in cartridges was illegal, and they could only be bought at a special warehouse. After some time, the guy was still able to find this warehouse, and found that it is in demand among hunters and mercenaries whose life is tightly connected with weapons. Since he didn't understand much about the caliber of his weapon, he just asked about the availability of cartridges for his rifle. And yes, there were cartridges available. However, this surprised the guy at least by the fact that the price of 10 rounds was equal to 1 gram of gold, which was not a cheap pleasure. The seller, a happy pretty girl, explained this cost by the fact that a bullet cannot rarely save the owner's life, even if it is only one. Seeing the surprise on the guy's face about the price, she was skeptical about his solvency, but he unexpectedly took out a whole bar of gold. This momentarily removed all doubts about his poverty, and she quickly prepared a bunch of cartridges for her buyer. And also realizing that the boy could be really rich, she took her business card straight out of her bra, which puzzled Ron a little. Taking the business card, he realized that in this world, unlike his, you can buy almost anything you want, whether it's a weapon or ammunition for it, or maybe something worse. After selling all the canned food and returning home, the guy laid out all the acquired weapons and ammunition on his bed and reflected on his not very big profit. Suddenly, there was a knock on his door, and this puzzled the guy because he was not expecting guests. And even if he did, he definitely didn't take into account the presence of weapons on the bed. It was clearly not the best idea to take someone to visit, especially in his world. A very familiar voice rang out from behind the door, which did not cause suspicious alarm, but was still at the wrong time as never before, and it was Linda. Since his older colleague was adored, but still not with a bunch of firearms on the bed, so he began frantically trying to figure out where to hide it. And I didn't come up with anything better than hiding everything under my bed. Even if it was as stupid as possible, nothing better came to mind. There really was Linda on the doorstep. As always, she was very beautiful, but Ron clearly did not understand why she came to visit him. She, as usual, was in high spirits and asked why he had been fumbling behind the door for so long, to which a completely logical explanation related to a quick cleaning sounded. Since the guest needs to offer something, Ron climbed into the refrigerator, and he was casually visited by the idea that Linda was not only good to the girl, she was also an excellent cook. Casting a dreamy glance in her direction, he thought that it would be nice if such a beautiful girl were his wife, since she was also very sensitive. He would come home from work exhausted and tired from a hard day's work and would be proud to say, "Darling, I'm home." She in turn would meet him in a cute apron and would be interested in what he would like to do, eat, maybe a bath, or take it. In reality, Linda was already sitting on the bed and looking around the room trying to find something indecent because she had never seen men's rooms before. Ron replied with some embarrassment that he was a decent young man and there was nothing of any obscenity in his room. But ironically, Linda drew attention to the floor, next to the bed, where the barrel of a recently hidden weapon was sticking out. It was too unexpected for the main character. He immediately realized that she definitely shouldn't see this. Therefore, he rushed in her direction so much with one thought: she should not see what is stored there. but by a ridiculous accident, he pushed her onto the bed and himself was on top, clearly not expecting such a turn of events. He jumped up from his seat and tried to justify it by saying that Linda is very beautiful, and he was unable to restrain himself from such a temptation. To the surprise of the main character, Linda reacted quite normally, if you do not take into account excessive embarrassment. When she left, she said that it was normal for young guys at his age to want a beautiful girl. Ron had already thought that Linda would hate him and would no longer communicate with him, but she, closing the door, said that she was pleased to hear it from him. The room became empty. The main character stood empty in it with a very pleased face, not believing that this had really happened. But slapping himself on the cheeks, he quickly brought himself to his senses and began to prepare for the next transfer to another world, since this was an extremely important task. Walking through his hometown, he reflected that selling canned food in large quantities would attract a lot of extra attention, and he needed to find something simpler. And then he caught sight of a man with a sign about the sale of potatoes, and this idea seemed great to the main character. Ron asked about the cost of potatoes, to which he received the answer that this year was not very successful for the seller, and if the main character buys, he will get a 20% discount. The guy said he would buy potatoes from the man, and the seller asked how many potatoes the main character needed. To this, the guy said that he needed all the potatoes that he had, but only on condition that they were delivered directly to his door. From such generosity of the buyer, the man could not stand it and tore his t-shirt, exposing his bare, muscular torso, shouting that the delivery of potatoes would not be a problem for him. It was only at this moment that the guy realized that he had to first find out how many potatoes a man has, but I have good thoughts about being late. The delivery, as it was said, did not cause problems, and now there was a huge mountain of potatoes lying in front of the guy's door, which was undoubtedly too much even for his ideas. After some time, he returned to the settlement, and it was still as simple and had almost nothing from the previous civilization. Having packed himself with potatoes, the guy was thinking about how popular his sale would be and whether it would be popular at all. From somewhere nearby came the sound of metal forging, which was unusual in the world with firearms. Passing by, the guy stopped to look and saw a real forge and a blacksmith forging some kind of workpiece. The guy was clearly perplexed with what was happening and asked about the expediency of using a bladed weapon, having a firearm with him. The blacksmith reacted calmly to this and said that firearms need constant care and ammunition replenishment. Bypassing all this is a source of noise and can attract more zombies. This seemed to be an indisputable advantage, and the guy decided that having a system with a lot of skills, he could use a cold weapon, and it's worth buying one for himself. But it was still not clear the cost of edged weapons and why they were being sold at all, to which the blacksmith said that he was not interested in money, but only food and delicious. Ron decided to offer him potatoes as a meal, even though he himself thought that the blacksmith would not like this idea. However, the blacksmith was very surprised by such food. He was especially surprised by the purity of this potato, and it was clear that he liked it, and it was understandable since it was grown in another world. The blacksmith smiled good-naturedly. It brought him pleasant memories from the past, and he offered his best katana for this potato. After exposing the katana, he said that it was based on crystals from corpses, and it is capable of causing additional damage to zombies, as well as absorbing their blood. Taking the katana in his hands, the main character noticed that it is very sharp and can quickly blunt, but the blacksmith assured that after it absorbs the blood of zombies, it recovers. After such a discovery, the guy realized that just one bag of potatoes for such an unusual and most likely powerful weapon was a very good deal. Once he had a new weapon, he opened the system and started looking at a suitable skill for wielding cold weapons, and this was just right for a katana, and it cost the same 100 points. Ron was very impatient to test the new weapon, and he went to the nearest forest to hunt for zombies. And the zombies did not take long to wait. After walking a little deeper into the forest, the guy heard the already familiar noise behind him. However, now he was not afraid of them, considering that he had become much stronger from the first time in this alien world. Accordingly, he was ready for this attack. With a light movement thanks to the skill of basic possession of a katana, he was able to quickly deal with the zombies. As promised by the blacksmith, Katana really absorbed the blood of zombies, which seemed something not natural. After examining the katana after the fight, the main character was convinced that the katana really became a little sharper, and this could not but please. Since there was no danger anymore, it was necessary to take the crystals from the corpses of zombies for further sale. And when the crystals were extracted, Ron heard shots from the wrong direction, which made him alert because he didn't know what to do. At this time, the zombies' heads were flying apart from clear hits to the head, and this damage did not allow them to move anymore. The girl in the red jacket was shooting, and she was clearly not happy that these crystals would not be enough for her needs. Unexpectedly, she was attacked by not a simple zombie, because it differed from the rest of the high speed and long tongue. However, the zombies of the second level are stronger and are not afraid of being hit by a gun, which the huntress owned, and there was no noticeable damage. The huntress was not stupid, and she understood that the power of a pistol shot was not enough, but there was no choice, and she reached for the next clip. At that moment, the zombie reacted faster and grabbed the huntress by the hand in which she was holding a new clip. This caught the girl by surprise, and from an unexpectedly strong grip, her hand loosened and the clip fell to the floor, which did not bode well. By the time the huntress realized that she had been grabbed by the hand, she was already completely enveloped in the mutant's tongue. Moreover, this monster was in no hurry to kill her. He decided to play with her a little and began to slowly drive the end of his tongue along her neck, which looked very disgusting. Realizing that she would not be able to get free and something irreparable was about to happen, the girl screamed at the top of her voice for help. At that moment, Ron appeared from behind the tree trunks and warned her about the danger, taking his katana at the ready. In one simple movement, he was able to chop off the monster's tongue, thereby freeing the girl from a strong grip. The next moment, the main character decided to end this fight and rushed into the attack, assuming a fighting position. But he did not take into account the fact that the more ordinary a zombie is, the more unusual abilities he has, and one of them was regeneration, and quite fast. Since the guy did not expect this from the attack, he quickly went on the defensive, closing himself with a katana, but his tongue wrapped around it like a whip. Given the strength of this difficult zombie, he could not hold the katana in his hands, and the enemy easily threw it aside. Funny fact, these zombies also possessed some semblance of intelligence, and realizing that the victim was defenseless, the zombies began to laugh loudly, anticipating their victory. Suddenly, his body began to explode from a hail of shells fired in his direction, and before he died, he could not even understand what had happened. It was the same rifle that the main character had recently purchased, and he had not yet had the opportunity to try it out in action. The power of this rifle was enough to kill the zombies of the second level with a few shots, which was very beneficial for the main character. Taking out the crystal from the zombie, Ron remembered about the girl he had saved and began to look for her in the vicinity. I didn't have to look for her for a long time, but her condition was not very good. Considering with what force she was squeezed by this nasty tongue, she lost consciousness and was covered with vile mucus. The main character was visited by the idea that this mucus can be caustic, and it urgently needs to be washed off the body of a young huntress. After wandering around the forest for a while, the guy found the river he was looking for and did the necessary procedures. After a while, the girl began to recover, which was undoubtedly a plus, but it was not clear how she would behave. After waking up, there was a swarm of conflicting thoughts and questions in her head. She remembered that she had lost consciousness and did not understand why she was still alive. At a certain point, she realized that she had been sleeping completely naked, and this caused her bewilderment and misunderstanding of what was happening. Noticing this, the main character was glad to see the rescued huntress in good health, and decided to introduce himself to her. However, what was to be expected, the girl was not so much pleased, but on the contrary, drove into the paint, given that she is completely naked next to an unknown guy. Therefore, she launched a stone at him. Ron, realizing how it looked from her side, smiled awkwardly and caught the stone, explaining that he saved her and just washed her from the poison of that zombie. At this moment, the girl was not very worried about her salvation. She was more stressed by the thought that this guy had seen her naked body. The main character explained that he had washed only the upper part. And even this information did not remove the embarrassment from the face of the young hunter, because he still saw and touched. Ron offered a few potatoes as an apology, which he boiled while she was sleeping, and it clearly made her angry that her body was valued at only 2 potatoes. Having calmed down, the huntress decided to try this gift after all, and was very surprised that potatoes could be so delicious. Seeing that she liked the taste of potatoes, the main character offered her ground salt, and this surprised the huntress even more than before. For the guy, her reaction was not entirely clear, and he asked what the reason for such surprise was, to which the girl replied that salt was very popular on the market. She also explained that salt is quite scarce and it can only be obtained on the market, from which it was no less valuable. Ron was very interested in this, because it was very difficult to get salt in areas remote from seawater, which means it was another business idea. While he was lost in his thoughts, the huntress pulled him out of his thoughts by asking if he could sell her the remaining salt. At this moment, the main character came up with an interesting idea, and he offered to give the remaining salt for free. The girl could not believe in such generosity, and uncertainly asked if it was a joke, to which the guy replied that it was just a bag of salt. In the end, such a bag would cost tens of grams of gold in the store, and the main character gave it away for free, and this fact was alarming. While she was thinking about it, the guy asked if she wanted an endless supply of salt and food. Of course he wanted something in return. The girl was glad of such an offer, but at some point she became sad and said that she had no money and crystals to exchange. Then Ron confidently took her by the shoulder and informed her that there were other ways to repay him without using any valuables. To this offer he received a lightning-fast refusal and accompanied by increased noise and a push in the chest, from which the main character was thrown back. The girl folded her arms on her chest with a cross, as if covering her body, and shouted loudly that she could not sell her body because she was not touched by anyone yet. The guy was very amused, and after catching his breath, he said that he only needed her strength as an employee. Respectively, he would pay her for it. Once again, the misunderstood guy swung smoothly in the hands of a young huntress who did not like the ambiguity of the first sentence. In the end, she calmed down and after thinking for a few seconds, said that she agreed to such conditions, but on her part only work and no other services. And in vain she so abruptly announced other services, because the main character has already begun to try to imagine how it would look from the outside. The image of this girl only in a bunny suit with ears popped up in his head, and she asked him to do all sorts of obscenities with her. Since the fantasy was too sweet, he did not notice how the evil girl came close to him from behind. With one sharp movement, she grabbed him by the neck in a stranglehold, with obvious malice wondering what the main character was thinking there. When the huntress calmed down and dressed in her clothes, the main character noticed that there were only first and second level zombies near the settlement. It turned out that the huntress was very experienced in this matter, and said that there are 9 different types of zombies in total, and a maximum of level 3 can be found in the vicinity of the settlement. But the main character objected to this information and said that up to this point he had only been told about 8 types of zombies, without mentioning the 9th kind. It turned out that the 9th level has an unusual property. Each individual can have a different level of strength, starting from the 1st and ending with a level above the 8th. Meanwhile, the main character and his companion approached the refugee camp, which repelled its visitors with a very unpleasant smell. The huntress explained this by the fact that there are difficulties with water in the camp, and because of this, people rarely wash, stretching these terms to 2 weeks, to which the main character noticed that she herself had washed for a long time. This undoubtedly hurt the girl, and she began to justify that she often washes in the river. After this funny scene of justification, Ron said that it was just a joke and there was no smell from the huntress. At this time, they were greeted by some girl. In her forms, she was not a bit inferior to the guy's companion, and from her the main character learned that his companion's name was Erica, and introduced herself as Chloe. Also, this girl asked to evaluate her new invention. Erica was not very happy about the new waste of energy, but the girl showed her a large Senecnaya panel and said that now her computer will be able to work 24 hours a day. It was clear from Erica's face that she was not very happy about her friend's invention, given that there was no internet left in the world anymore. These words upset Chloe very much because she thought she was inventing something useful to use. However, she quickly accepted her friend's point of view and agreed that her program was nothing compared to the value of food. The information about some program interested the guy, and he offered to buy it for potatoes, if, of course, Chloe agrees to it. This offer was not thoughtless, because Ron noticed that despite the apocalypse, the technologies of this world were more developed, and it was possible to make money on it. Chloe took out a flash drive and told me that this program is called Evolution, and it literally makes it possible to evolve independently. The explanations greatly fueled the protagonist's interest in this program, and he wanted to know for sure if it was true. The girl was glad of such an offer, but said that this program has not yet been finalized and it will take time, which she does not have, so she will have to go to the zombie hunter. But the main character was determined and offered food and safety so that she could find an assistant and finalize the program. Of course, this option suited Chloe, and she completely agreed, saying that if the main character really provides food, she will provide him with all the results of the study. Ron agreed without hesitation, because this program was very important to him, and he wanted to try it out as soon as possible. In turn, Chloe was very happy with such a deal. Such a cute dialogue hurt Erica, and she was offended, saying that if she was provided with food, she would also be able to find people in the zombie hunter squad. The main character heard these complaints and said that he would also need a hunting party, and he would provide Erica with food and equipment. Erica's behavior changed a lot, and she was obviously happy with these words, even if she was not completely sure of their honesty, to which the main character said that this was not a joke. As soon as she found out that this was not a joke, and Ron actually offered such a deal, she rushed at him with obvious joy in her eyes. Hugging him, Erica hugged his shoulder hard, and it was a sincere gratitude. A moment later, she ran away, saying that she would soon find people for the squad and would not take long to wait, and the guy stood in a stupor after hugging. Half an hour later, Erica really brought a considerable number of people for the squad. They looked pretty strong. The main character, of course, expected that she would bring a couple of onlookers with her, but he could not have predicted this in any way. It remains only to find out whether they are simple people or hunters. Erica said with full confidence that these are very good hunters and their skills are at the proper level, only they want to eat first. Ron took out a bag of potatoes and offered it to the hunters, saying that he never lies, and if they listen to him, they will be able to earn money. The hunters near the tree were skeptical and thought that the main character was too weak to be a leader. When suddenly a bullet flew between them and crashed into a tree, signaling to them that they were in danger. It was the main character who heard their conversation and brought it to the attention that if they tried to rebel against him, it would not end well for them. After such a confident speech, the hunters were definitely happy to work for this guy, but they were even more pleased with the thought of food, which was full. Ron looked at everyone present and realized that they had almost no equipment for conducting raids and offered to buy it. Meanwhile, the forest had its own special atmosphere and zombies roamed, not afraid of absolutely anything. But in vain, because they were destroyed in the blink of an eye by accurate shots of hunters. Ron's group progressed without any hindrance. He himself did not have to do anything. After taking the crystals out of the corpses, the main character said that the hunters would shoot in the head because they were wasting ammo. At that moment, a rather unpleasant-looking guy came out of the bushes. He was huge, and his stomach was not inferior to his size. He shouted at the hunters to find out which gang they belonged to, since they had entered someone else's land. Apparently, he recognized Erica and was angry because in the past she managed to steal something from them and apparently went unpunished. But she wasn't the least bit intimidated by his evil face and the tone with which he spoke, since she was standing between two hunters with weapons on the edge. From somewhere behind, the voice of several more people who came to the aid of the fat man was heard, and they were sure that a bunch of refugees were not dangerous for them. The main character did not like it, as well as the fact that a gun was pointed in his direction, but this did not interfere with his self-confidence. And at the moment of his speech, the main character took out a katana and made a vertical swing. His facial expression changed from friendly to very unfriendly. The guy with the gun was not scared at all because he was confident in his own abilities and in the pistol, which gave him an advantage over the katana. But he did not take into account that the distance can be quickly shortened, which the main character took advantage of and cut off his hand, in which he held a gun. A moment later, A heart-rending scream rang out over the forest because this bandit realized that his hand was gone, and the pain flew into the severed place. Considering that this would be enough, the main character threatened the bandits and asked them to tell their boss that the refugee camp was no longer in his power. The bandit without a hand was clearly not enough, and he began to claim that their boss copes with zombie mutants alone, and the main character will also die for nothing. But quickly assessing the situation, he ordered them to return to the base since they could not win this battle. And when they were about to leave, the main character called out to them. They definitely did not expect this, but they understood that it would not end well for them. Since the main character's advantage was undeniable, he was annoyed that neither wanted to just leave after all those insults, and he ordered them to give up all the things they had. The guy without a hand began to be indignant that it was better to be killed than humiliated, expressing his obvious dissatisfaction with what was happening and saying that the main character was too cruel. And despite this, they did not have a very big choice from which they had to come to terms with what was happening and obediently lay out all their things. But the main character was not satisfied with these meager belongings because bandits have long oppressed refugees, and this payment is too little, so they had to leave quickly. Although it was the dead of night outside, there was a light on at the base of the hungry wolf gang, but the night was not too dark because the moon was full. The bandit without a hand was kneeling in front of his boss, who was a huge man who vaguely resembled Indians. The bandit had a hard time because he brought bad news to his master. In response to the report, the boss called the refugees just dogs that depend on their owner, and part of it could be called true. The giant approached his subordinate and put his hand on his shoulder, saying that they could not ignore it. However, the boss was clearly not happy with the fact that his subordinates lost without a fight, gave all their supplies to the refugees, and believed that such garbage had no right to exist in their gang. The bandit began to understand what his boss was talking about, and what he meant by saying what he meant by talking about existence. It scared him to the point of trembling, and he began to beg for mercy. But it didn't save him. Only the shadow of a wolf on the wall mercilessly bit off the head of a one-armed bandit for his first and last mistake. The next day, the main character's group ran into the fat man again, and this time was not going to let him go, wanting to avenge all his mockery. But this sturdy man with a sword was not really afraid of refugees, considering that he was in the strongest gang, and it was up to them to decide who became stronger and who did not. Ron didn't care at all what the name of this dangerous gang was. Hungry wolves or dogs, absolutely no difference. And if they cooperate, then it's good. But if not, then it won't end well. The fat man took the gun raised in front of him as a serious threat and decided that the main character did not have the guts, showed where to shoot. And the shot sounded, from which the fat man was clearly scared and jerked, losing his balance, but quickly realized that the target was not. He decided to look back. Behind him lay the corpse of a zombie with a pierced skull, and the fat man was scared by the thought that in place of this almost headless zombie, he could be himself. As if reading his thoughts, the main character confirmed that if they did not cooperate, the fat man would be next. Realizing that it was not worth waiting for more, the bandit jumped up and ran away with all his legs, managing to threaten, shamefully leaving the clearing. Since Ron couldn't be called a local from the word at all, he had no idea what the danger of the wolf gang was, which can't be said about Eric. She understood that the bandits were dangerous and explained that due to lack of resources, the gangs had divided the territory, and they would not give it away so easily. Meanwhile, the fat man ran to his camp. He was really scared of the main character and wanted to find someone in the camp to help. But no sooner had this insidious thought found hope than he had to break abruptly. Since he had been away from the camp for quite a while, he could not quickly figure out what had happened here while he was away. All his companions were lying dead, and they were not killed by weapons or anything else, but most likely by someone very strong and capable, since he was able to kill a whole group of hunters. And this someone was already standing behind the fat man, who was not a small child at all, but clearly felt that the creature behind was taller and bigger than him. Turning around, he saw a huge zombie with no less huge teeth, whose entire appearance indicated that this was the third level. From the side where the fat man ran away, a deafening scream was heard, which echoed through the clearing where the main character's group was located. No one except Ron understood whose cry it was, but he guessed that it was a fat man and commanded to be on guard. A minute later, the same bandit jumped out to meet them, but he was without his sword and was so scared that he ran very fast. And the squad saw a not very pleasant picture because they saw what was chasing the fat man. A huge hand was rapidly approaching the bandit. In less than a second, the bandit's head, which completely fit into a huge hand, felt the tension. A very large zombie took the fat man with both hands like a sandwich and slowly began to bring him to the open mouth. And when he bit off half of the bandit's body, the main character's group realized that this zombie was more dangerous than the second level. Panic seized the hunters who had never seen such large mutants. They clearly did not want to die and asked to run away, just not to fight with this monster. But Ron had already clearly decided that they would have to fight because if they ran, this zombie would kill them one by one, and in order to avoid this, he gave the command to everyone to line up to strike. And as soon as the panic in his ranks subsided, having assessed the situation once again, he gave the command to shoot, firing the first shot at this creature. The whole squad obediently opened fire, sparing no ammunition and their weapons, because the prospect of dying here did not please anyone. While the whole group was shooting at the enemy, the main character gave orders where and which group to shoot in order to immobilize this zombie. And this tactic bore fruit, because the monster stopped and tried in every way to cover himself with his hands from this hail of bullets. It began to seem to all hunters that the weapon their boss bought for them was very powerful and capable of stopping level 3 zombies. But at some point, the zombie stopped defending itself, opened up and began to yell furiously, exuding a red glow from itself. Erica was the first to stop firing, because she was more experienced than other hunters. She realized that it was not for nothing, and now the third-level zombie mutated, and this did not bode well. The morning blues began to make their way into the tent where the main character was sleeping after a night of drinking. This made Ron abruptly get up and realize that they had drunk a lot yesterday and his head hurt very much. And everything would be fine, but when he looked down, he saw someone's gentle hand that was on his groin. Shifting his gaze, he saw Erica, who was sleeping peacefully next to him and for some reason was naked, which was pretty stupefying. Ironically, she woke up at the same moment and, rubbing her sleepy eyes, did not immediately notice Ron sitting next to her. While she was recovering from a stormy evening, the main character decided to give a voice, which Erica clearly did not expect. She was scared at least by the fact that she was not sleeping alone, and turned around and saw the main character. The whole dream disappeared, and she began to mercilessly drag Ron, trying to find out what he had done to her last night. But he, like her, did not remember anything. In the midst of the swearing, Chloe came into the tent to inform that the program that the main character had asked her for was already ready. By a strange coincidence, at this point in time, everything looked the way it looked, and Chloe wondered if she had entered on time. Two young men jumped up from their seats and, like small children who were caught by their mother, began to justify that nothing had happened between them. Chloe knew this for sure, because she herself had dragged their drunken bodies into this ward since there were no other places. The only thing that was not clear to these two was that they slept without clothes, to which Chloe said that they both vomited and she had to undress them. Even though it was done out of good intentions, Erica did not like that she slept in only her panties. The programmer handed the flash drive to the main character. There was a program on this flash drive that could attack someone else's computer, and even an idiot could use it. Ron didn't like that I took him for a stupid person, but considering the last few days, it was well-deserved what yesterday's drinking was worth. But he was clearly confident in his abilities, since he had experience in handling programs, and no difficulties should arise. In the company where the main character worked, everything was as usual. Small departments with employees who were doing their job. Ron was also one of these employees, but as usual, his boss approached him and threw his work on him. Leaving, this scoundrel rejoiced, because he gave an impossible task for an intern, and he will definitely make a mistake wherever, and most likely will not have time at all. Suddenly, something very weighty and soft landed on the head of the main character, for which there was only one explanation: it was someone's chest. It was Linda. Having heard about the impossible task from the boss, she decided to offer her help to solve the situation. However, Ron was determined to do everything on his own, and Linda did not need to know what he would do. She did not object and asked to call if anything was needed. Now that he was alone, he took out the flash drive that Chloe had given him and decided to see how it worked. As soon as he inserted it into the computer, the program on the flash drive started on its own and was surprisingly simple, but effective. The main character seemed to be in a space with a lot of running lines that processed all the information in the office very quickly. One of the abilities of this program was the ability to watch someone through someone else's computer, and the main character immediately took advantage of this. Looking at his colleague through the monitor, he was able to guess that he was watching some kind of vulgarity again, instead of doing work. He also discovered that his boss was communicating with an employee of a competing company, and this alerted him, and also gave him the opportunity to avenge months of humiliation. As soon as the plan was ready, Ron hacked into his boss's computer with special cunning and found irrefutable dirt on him. A few hours later, the boss announced an intern about overtime work for today, which implied several urgent tasks. The trainees clearly did not like this course of events, since they were not paid for overtime, but performed as a full-fledged one. The main character got tired of enduring this, and he asked the boss not to dump his work on others, but to do it on his own, to which he received the expected answer about the absence of evidence. But the intern was ready for such a turn and threw a bunch of sheets of paper with compromising materials at the top, giving others the opportunity to look at him too. And the interns, seeing the information on paper, were not very happy that they had to make game models from a competing company. To these objections, the boss began to yell that they were just interns and useless for the company, but at least they were doing something. But to his surprise, he heard the voice of the director of the company, who wanted an explanation of what was happening, and was clearly dissatisfied with the behavior of his deputy. In turn, the deputy tried to justify himself and assured that he had done nothing of the kind, and it was all an empty slander. However, it was clear from the director's face that he was not going to listen to these pathetic words, since the fault of his deputy was obvious. The head of the company understood that a conflict with junior employees was inevitable and tried to smooth it out, promising that there would be no such attitude in their direction in the future. But Ron was determined and said that he had already written a letter of resignation and no longer intended to stay in this company. Unexpectedly for everyone, the other interns also expressed a desire to quit because they too were tired of such a careless attitude. In an instant, the department, which had about 6 young employees, was empty, and all this because of the negligent attitude of their boss. Naturally, this could not please the head, given that on the eve they took a large order, and now it will take much more time to complete it. Given all this, he asked his deputy to write a letter of resignation. At this time, the main character felt definitely not smart, because of him, many people voluntarily left the company, and he felt guilty for it. But his colleagues did not agree with him, because their desire was voluntary, and they had already endured all this for a long time. However, they were depressed because now they had to look for a new job, and some had families to feed. In this regard, the main character had a plan, and he invited his colleagues to work for him in the future, since he plans to open his own business and he will need help. The young people were very pleased with this news because there was no need to find a job, and their new boss is well known to them as a person. The next day, Ron went to another world again, as he had a lot of plans. He reflected that reselling goods from one world to another is a long and not as profitable occupation as he wanted, and now that he has some capital, he needs to create his own company. He was pulled out of his thoughts by the unexpected cry of hunters who shouted to him about some problem. They were quickly approaching the camp on motorcycles and shouted right on the move that Erica was in some kind of trouble and she urgently needed help. Since the main character did not understand what was going on, he asked the hunter to calm down and tell everything again, only more clearly. The hunter said that during the purchase they were attacked by people from a gang of wolves, and Erica lured them into the jungle to save the others. Ron wasted no time getting on a motorcycle and said he would save her personally and let the hunters gather people to help. He left, squeezing everything out of his transport that he could squeeze, because he did not expect that a gang of wolves would attack the camp in his absence. At this time, the car was trying to break away from the chase at high speed because the prospect of stopping was not a bit rosy. The car was being chased by several motorcyclists who were serious about beating, and were sure that it would not be possible to hide from them on their own territory. Erica was driving the car, and she was desperately trying to escape from the chase, but she understood that it would hardly work on such a bulky car. And her thoughts were quite material because there were several motorcycles on the road ahead, which made it impossible to drive further. When she stopped, the leader of this group asked where she was in such a hurry, and said that she would not be able to drive further. The guy with the gun ordered the others to get the girl out of the car and bring her to him. But at that moment, something rumbled violently behind them, which scared them pretty much and forced them to duck. The bandits clearly did not understand what it was, and most importantly, why the motor of one of the motorcycles exploded. Suddenly, a teddy bear appeared on the head of one of them, who had a fuse, but the bandit did not see it and thought it was a simple toy, not knowing where it came from here. A more experienced hunter quickly realized that this is not an ordinary soft toy, and the burning wick on it is clearly not for beauty. And just as he was about to say this, the toy exploded right in the face of another bandit, which definitely defied explanation. An attractive girl appeared from behind the trees who introduced herself as Nika, and she clearly did not like that such a bunch of men offended a weak girl. Since she was clearly dissatisfied with this, she threw an unusual ball at the bandits, having previously taken out a check. As soon as the grenade hit the target, another explosion was formed, which was clearly more powerful than the previous ones, and because of which body parts and vehicles scattered around. Nika was very pleased with such turns because there was nothing left of her enemy but a piece. She was even more convinced that a big howl was needed to win. Erica jumped out of the car, who immediately recognized her friend, and was very glad to see her because she appeared very timely. It was noticeable that they had known each other for a long time, and Nika was also glad to see her friend, even if their meeting was just a coincidence. Erica was glad to see them, not only because she hadn't seen Nika for a long time, but also because of the rescue, since she wouldn't have been able to escape from the bandits on her own. Nika didn't feel like a savior at all, since Erica had saved her many times before waking up, and this rescue was a common gesture of friendship on her part. While they were happily chatting, a large figure stood in the shade of the trees, who was surprised to meet the awakened one. This figure turned out to be the head of the wolf gang, and he wanted to test the strength of this girl and at the same time deal with Erica. Suddenly, a burned hand grabbed his leg. The owner of this mutilated limb turned out to be one of the bandits who himself looked no less bad. He asked to save him, which clearly angered his boss. Pulling his leg out of the weakened grip, the gang leader began to mercilessly beat his subordinate on the head, which clearly could not leave him a chance of salvation. Having finished with these episodes, the gang leader invited Nika to join his gang because he considered her promising and promised that she would become strong and famous. The girl agreed to this unexpected proposal without hesitation, confirming that the head of the wolf gang is very strong. And not believing it, she threw several bombs in his direction at once to check whether these rumors were true. When the bombs reached the target, a very powerful explosion was heard, which left no chance for survival to anyone, and the girl was confident of her victory. But something was clearly wrong, because there was a distinct stirring in the epicenter of the explosion, and it was approaching. Suddenly, the leader burst out of the smoke and was obviously glad to start the fight, and that could not but surprise without a single scratch. A prolonged scream of girls echoed through the surroundings. Ron listened to this scream and immediately realized that it was Erica's voice, but he was alarmed that there was a smell of burning in the vicinity. He understood that it was impossible to delay and began to add speed, trying to get to the aid of his subordinate. After a short amount of time, he still got to the place, and since the speed was obviously high, he had to brake sharply to a complete stop. Before his eyes was an unpleasant picture in which a man he did not know was standing in front of two girls who were already unconscious. Putting his foot on the head of the limp Erica, the leader of the gang of wolves, was waiting for the appearance of the main character and did not immediately notice him. Seeing such disrespect on his part, Ron was very angry, because Erica occupied far from the last place in his life. The head noticed this anger and was glad that he managed to bring the guy to such a state, but he was sure that he was weak and would do nothing. Not expecting further provocations, the main character, in a fit of anger, quickly shortening the distance, swung for a blow. The leader of the bandits did not expect such a turn, since Ron did not look unusually strong from the outside, but his speed indicated the opposite. The consequences after being hit in the face turned out to be bad for the leader because the shockwave threw him into a tree, which he broke. The main character thought that this would be enough and rushed to Erica, trying to bring the girl to her senses and understand what her condition was. Erica was in relative order and even managed to recover, saying that she missed only 2 strokes, which was enough for her. At this time, the bully was returning back, and he was very happy to meet a worthy opponent, since he had not met such for a long time. Now the giant was serious and was not going to underestimate his enemy, but at the same time that he would not be very strong. Since the leader was confident only in his strength and always decided everything by force, he decided to do the same this time. For Ron, it was a revelation that such a big man was just as fast, and he didn't have the opportunity to dodge, only to block. The head, in turn, was clearly confident in his strength and thought that a simple block would not save such a fragile body from damage. But the main character was unharmed. He received only minor damage and understood that he would not be able to fight on equal terms with such an enemy, and he would have to use the help of the system. In order to cope with such an enemy, he will have to improve his fighting skills, which in turn will improve his strength and agility. There was nothing else on the screen besides these abilities, which upset the main character, because this was all he had to build a business. After spending a lot of points on leveling up skills, Ron felt an unusual surge of strength, which he had never felt before. While he was doing this, the leader wasted no time and was already preparing to deliver another crushing blow, and he was sure that this blow would be the last. Gathering all his strength, he hit straight at the target, but his fist stopped before reaching the target. Realizing that his most powerful blow was stopped with only one hand, he was in confusion and did not understand how this was possible. The main character was pleased with his improved skills because now he could fight to the fullest. Holding the enemy's hand, he picked him up with his other hand and made a powerful throw through himself. It was definitely a martial arts technique. Even though it was a throw, but as Ron's physical strength increased, he was very strong. The leader clearly did not expect to face such a force, and he already began to understand that in pure physical strength, he is inferior to the main character. Ron was disappointed that the bandit turned out to be so weak and wanted to finish the fight by hitting the enemy's face. The bandit, realizing that he had no chance of winning, used his only trump card and began to turn into a wolf. The transformation took place almost instantly, and the main character did not have time to react to it, and he was thrown back. Landing on his back and raising his head, he did not understand what had just happened and what kind of creature was in the place of the bandit. Instead of the leader of the bandits, there was a huge wolf in front of his eyes, who said that the main character would never be compared to the power of the awakened. Absolutely not understanding what was happening, the main character was frantically trying to figure out what it meant to wake up. The wolf brought a little clarity to this question, saying that only some people achieve powers that exceed human ones, but in order to achieve this, you need to absorb crystals from corpses. Shouting that the main character is weak in comparison with him, the wolf struck a fairly quick blow with his paw. This speed was enough for Ron to react late, and as a result he had several shallow wounds on his body. Now the wolf was completely confident in his advantage, and was going to return to the main character, all the blow in double size. The main character turned around and realized that he would not be able to fight at full strength and would hurt the girls, so you need to take the fight in the other direction. To achieve this goal, he began to tease the wolf, calling him a dog, and this had the desired effect. In a few jumps, the main character disappeared into the trees, and the wolf was going to catch up with him. This is what Ron wanted, so that the wolf chased him and lost sight of him, which gave an opportunity for an attack. Although the wolf lost his victim, he did not lose hope of finding her, because he had heightened senses for this. At this time, the main character, realizing that he was not visible, decided to try a hidden attack, and taking out a katana, jumped on the wolf. But the wolf's reaction was faster than all his expectations, and he immediately turned towards the threat, even if he did not hear this attack. Grabbing the main character by the neck, he explained that his sense of smell is 10 times better than human, which gives him the opportunity to smell the victim, and now he will finish this fight. But the main character was sure of the opposite, because he had already found a way to defeat this wolf. The next moment, the main character held his breath, taking in as much air as possible. It was a mystery to the wolf what this guy was going to do. He could not expect an attack, since the main character was immobilized, but this did not stop him, and he simply exhaled all the air into the wolf's face, or rather not quite exhaled, but rather regurgitated. This instantly disabled the wolf's nose because it was too sensitive, and the smell was very pungent. The main character knew in advance that all dogs hate the smell of onions, which he took advantage of. Since the nose was no longer working, and the eyes were watering, which caused visibility to drop to almost zero, the ox only waved its paws helplessly in front of him. For the main character, it was a great opportunity to finish this fight and strike the last blow. A wave of the katana, and the flow of such a mighty and formidable beast was cut from shoulder to hip, as if it was paper, but not alive. After the victory, the main character noticed some strange glow in the upper part of the monster, and since he didn't know what it was, he decided to check it out. In the monster's chest was a crystal similar to the ones that Ron took out of the dead zombies, with the only difference that this one was multicolored. This definitely surprised the main character, because he had never seen such a crystal in this world before, and it was interesting to find out what he could do. When the guy removed the crystal from the corpse and absorbed it, the system notified him that it was a crystal that increased the level, which led to the acquisition of new skills. One of these skills was a skill that allowed you to resurrect, heal, or control zombies, and the main character was happy with such a useful skill. After receiving the boost, the system again issued an alert, which this time spoke about the task according to which the player must build a shelter for a certain period of time, or he will die. The punishment for failure to complete the task in the form of death seemed to the main character too cruel, and this scared him pretty much. Since the prospect of dying did not suit the main character, he decided that he needed to start completing the task and come up with some kind of plan. Half a day later, he returned to the camp in order to talk to Erica and Nika about future plans, as they could help him with this. Nika introduced herself to Ron and told him that she has been a hunter since Erica saved her 3 years ago. On the outside, she seemed very young to the main character, so he was very surprised that she became a hunter so early. Erica explained that Nika is an unusual hunter and should not be underestimated since she was awakened, but the main character still did not figure out what it meant. Nika explained that after infection, some people do not become zombies, but on the contrary get super abilities because of the crystal that is activated in their head. Therefore, because of this, they are called awakened. She also explained that her ability is to produce explosives from any object she touches. While saying this, she was holding a cup in her hands, which suddenly began to glow, and Nika threw it towards the exit of the tent. As soon as the cup left the tent and fell to the floor, an explosion occurred, which was extremely surprising and could not be explained in any way. The main character considered this ability very cool and concluded that the awakened are invincible. But as Erica explained, this was not the case, since the awakened, as well as the zombies, were divided into 9 levels, and Nika belongs to the 3rd, and that wolf was the 4th level. Nika was very surprised by the strength of the main character, since he was able to defeat the awakened 4th level alone, and offered to join his group. Such an offer suited Ron, because he was confident in his abilities even if they were not enough, but they would always have enough food. After a while, the inhabitants of the camp came to the main character and thanked him for his help, but he thought that they wanted to take revenge on the wolves. But one of the men said that they were just farmers, and the leader of the wolves wanted to seize their territory, including them, but the guy saved them. This was good news for the main character, and he invited them to return to their work and not waste time in vain. However, the people said that their farm is still under the control of the gang, because after the death of the leader, a new one is simply chosen, and they offered Ron to become their leader, and they would only take food as payment. The main character could not miss such a proposal because he remembered the task for which he needed to create a shelter, and this was a good opportunity. While he was in his thoughts, the girls firmly decided that they would smash the whole den of wolves to smithereens because they were pretty tired of everyone. Meanwhile, there was a division of power on the farm, and the fighters fought with each other for the right to be the leader of the gang. Suddenly, they heard an unfamiliar voice, which made them look away from their battle and look at the person talking. And it was none other than the main character, who was pleased with the prospect of gaining leadership by brute force alone. Since he came here just for a fight, he decided not to delay, but to act, and abruptly rushed from the place to the top. After a moment, he was already sitting over two of the strongest fighters and pressed their heads to the ground, clearly realizing that they were clearly not his equal. The girls decided to keep up with their leader, and they came here to take revenge, so Nika started throwing grenades towards the crowd. Explosions began to rattle through the territory, which led others to panic, because they immediately recognized this girl. The whole crowd began to run away. At the same time, on the other hand, farmers came who had long wanted to get even with this gang, and they rushed to attack. After half an hour, the territory was littered with defeated gang members. No one managed to get out. After the completion of this massacre, the main character told the farmers that now the farm will belong to them, since it is rightfully theirs. But this prospect did not suit the farmers much, since there could be other gangs nearby, which meant that they could be attacked again, so they offered the main character to become the owner of these lands. Ron liked it, even a little embarrassed, and he promised that now the residents will be able to live in peace and they will have food and weapons for protection. As soon as the leader accepted his powers, the farmers began to shout with joy, because such a head suited them more than the previous one. But the adoption of such a responsible decision did not pass without a trace for Ron. The system immediately reacted and made adjustments to the program. Now the farm belonged to him, and the system indicated this on the screen by showing its characteristics. It also said that any of the items could be pumped with glasses. After a short analysis, the main character came to the conclusion that he still has enough crystals from corpses and gold, because even to protect the farm, he will have to invest these resources in the system. While Ron realized that he was still poor, Chloe came and said that they had found the safe of the Wolf Gang, and realizing that there might be something interesting in it, the main character wanted to look at it. It was not a difficult task for Chloe to open this safe, because she had the right skills and just picked up the combination. Given the size of the safe, the main character assumed that there was quite a lot of interesting things in it, maybe even valuables. When the safe doors opened, there was a huge pile of corpse crystals, while they were different, and not only the first level. The young people were very surprised to see this mountain of crystals, but Chloe was only thinking about buying potatoes. She also concluded that even such a number of crystals does not give them labor, which means that if someone wants to take these crystals, then the main character will not have it easy. But Ron already had an idea about solving this problem because he had been thinking about doing something like this for a long time, but he did not have the right skill. He went outside to the bodies of the murdered members of the gang of wolves, which had already been carefully stacked in front of him. The main character decided to test his new skill and applied it on these 3 corpses. The system also issued a notification about this procedure. After studying the notification system, the main character stretched out his hand to apply the skill, and some blue energy was drawn from it. It enveloped the bodies of the dead very quickly. It was like a kind of liquid that enveloped the dead bodies all over their area. For the first second, nothing happened, but after the bodies began to move their limbs a little, and then they began to rise at all. Since no one knew about the new abilities of the main character, Nick was scared by the unexpected resurrection of corpses. But Erica was not at a loss, immediately picked up a gun and prepared to shoot the living dead. The main character noticed this and intercepted Erica's gun with his hand, explained to her that it was not a zombie, but only his resurrected dolls. But Erica did not quite understand how it was. For the main character, it was an opportunity to test his skill, and he told her that after defeating the wolf, he got such an interesting skill. Of course, since these corpses were only puppets, he could freely control them, and they could become free labor, for example, chopping trees. The zombies were really chopping down a tree, and they did it normally for a while, but at some point one zombie chopped off the head of the second one, because he was standing in front of the impact trajectory. For Erica, it seemed that these corpses would not be very useful considering how stupid they were, and Ron also understood that it was already difficult to manage one, and even more so several. At that moment, Chloe's happy voice was heard, who said that she had already made a similar device that should help them. The main character was interested in this, and in his hand there turned out to be something similar to augmented reality glasses, At least it seemed so. Realizing that they need to be put on their heads and having done this, the main character had a question: how to use this device. Chloe took something similar to SIM cards out of her pocket and explained that these are chips, one of which can receive brainwaves and the other can send. Since brain activity was important for one of the chips, it had to be inserted into the helmet. And the other one naturally had to be inserted into the brain of a controlled subject, in this case a zombie. The most interesting thing was that the control took place remotely, and it seemed that the owner himself was inside the zombie. Having decided to test his new body, Ron decided to touch Erica's thigh to get more information about this process of consciousness transfer. Having done this, the main character was surprised how cool this invention was, because he clearly saw and felt everything. The only thing he didn't take into account Erica's reaction to such a sudden harassment, for which he got kicked right in the face. But even such an oversight made it clear that consciousness is not only inside the zombie's body, but also completely feels pain and other tactile sensations, and that was cool. Realizing how it all works, one brilliant idea came to the guy's head, in the implementation of which he needed the help of girls. They, of course, did not understand what the head wanted from them, and were puzzled by the unexpected appearance of some kind of plan. After a while, the heads of the zombies flew apart from the gunshots as if they were stuffed. All this was done by Erica. Since it was part of the main character's plan, he had to resurrect several zombies and attack her. It was a brilliant idea from the point of view of filming. Since the zombies and weapons were real, this battle looked great. However, neither Erica nor even Chloe understood why Ron needed these notes, and the only thing they managed to find out was that these were some kind of preparations. After all this, already in the real world, he had only to mount the resulting video and upload it to the internet. As a result, he created a fairly realistic trailer for the game and posted it on the portal. It was a kind of advertisement to attract an audience. The night flew by unnoticed by the main character, and morning had already come, as evidenced by the rays of dawn in the windows. When Ron woke up, he realized that he had fallen asleep right at the table. He was so exhausted by this activity. Despite the fact that he had just woken up, his condition was as sluggish as possible, and he really wanted to sleep, as evidenced by a strong yawn. But he still had to wake up, and he decided to check how things were going with his trailer. He had no hopes for him, and he wanted at least someone to appreciate him. But what he saw on the screen of his laptop surprised him very much, because he could not have expected this. On the screen, Chloe could be seen sitting, surrounded by a crowd of zombies, and an inscription in which the player was called upon to save the cute girl from danger. There were several young people sitting in front of the monitor who had been through enough to participate in the beta test of such a realistic game. At that time, some young girl was sitting in the office who was also interested in this game, but her people could not find the publisher of this game. This girl turned out to be the head of a large company, and she ordered all employees to leave comments under the video to gain access to the closed beta test. Apparently, this girl was a business shark, and she understood that if the game turned out to be the same as in the trailer, it would be a huge success. The young man was sitting and reloading his pistol, clearly preparing him for a combat situation. It was a retired Special Forces soldier named Rex, and since he understood weapons like no one else, he doubted that this was a game because everything in it was too real. For a girl named Mia, a package came that she had been waiting for a long time. She eagerly received it. Her room was in absolute order: camera, microphone, lighting in general, everything for good streaming. Mia was a famous streamer who had more than 5 million fans, and she wanted to show people the quality of this game. On the farm in the world of the apocalypse, silence and tranquility reigned, and it seemed that this was the most ordinary world in which there was not all the horror that Ron had seen. At this time, the main character was creating zombie corpses so that players could transfer into them, and at the moment he was making a body for Mia. The main character looked at Mia's photo and realized that her game body was exactly the same as the living one, so it simplified some tasks. One of these tasks was to create 50 models of players for their successful entry into this game. For Erica, it was absolutely not clear why the main character created each corpse with a different face, since the troops were used with the same faces for filming. At some point, she thought it was a fetish of the main character, to which he replied that it was not, and soon she would see everything. Of course, he did not want to reveal the true reasons for these actions because Eric would not understand half of what he said, and if he did, it would not end well for him. It was not difficult to create faces similar to the original, since the main character knew in advance what the players who registered for the beta test looked like. Chloe was a kind of administrator on the server and checked the performance of her devices and chips, but she was surprised that the main character found 50 people. But it was no longer important, since all the helmets had been sent to the players and the servers would be launched soon. It remained to see if they could enter the game. Chloe typed something into her laptop and reported that the brainwave controller was running, and now players will be able to connect to the bodies of zombies. Erica did not understand these devices, so it seemed to her that all this was a joke, since the bodies had not moved for quite a long time. Suddenly, Mia's body, which was standing next to Erica, opened her eyes, which was too abrupt for her. Mia was crazy with joy, because she did not believe until the last that such a game could be, and now she herself is here, at the same location as in the trailer. Erica was very surprised by the unexpected awakening of one of the zombies, and also that she is very energetic. At that moment, Mia ran up to Erica and began touching her breasts, wondering at the reality of the sensations. Naturally, if you touch Erica without her consent to it, then be ready to get in the face, which otherwise happened. And it didn't upset Mia at all because she felt pain, which was even more surprising for the game, and there was complete confidence that this was some other world. The other players also connected to their bodies and began to stretch their limbs, wondering how real everything is here. One of the corpses turned out to be a girl named Jill, the same owner of a large company who managed to get into the closed beta test, and she understood that she was not mistaken. Another player turned out to be a commando Rex, who was the only one who noticed the difference between his flexible and mobile body and a clumsy gaming one. After all the players entered the game, the main character attracted their attention by coughing several times into his hand. Usually this is enough. When everyone calmed down and paid attention to Ron, he greeted the new players and informed them that they were in the wilderness shelter, and that now they would start a new life. After a short greeting, the main character began to explain some of the rules in this game. One of them was death, after which the character would have to be remade by himself. While he was saying this, Mia came up to him at the toll booth and she was surprised by the reality of a non-player character. Ron did not immediately understand why she came up to him in a tight and cute and carefree smile, which made it a little uncomfortable. And this discomfort was quite justified, since the girl had a knife behind her back, which she was definitely going to use. And at the same moment she took out her hand with a knife and tried to hit the main character, thus checking the game for complete freedom of action. And it seemed to her that she would succeed, when suddenly there was a pop, and a small hole appeared right in the middle of her skull, which clearly discouraged her. From the force of the shot, she was thrown back, after which her body began to scatter into small particles. At this time, the main character was standing with a gun raised at the ready, and quite seriously stressed the importance of the rule about death, and asked the players not to die just like that. For the rest of the players, it was a surprise that after your death your account would be deleted, and you would have to create a new one. They considered it too cruel. A joyful Mia appeared behind them, who has already been able to resurrect, and according to her, the feeling of death here is no less real than the others. The main character continued to explain the rules that players are prohibited from harming or killing NPCs, since they, unlike players, will not be able to resurrect, just as non-player characters do not have an indicator like players. He also explained that to make sure that you have a non-player character in front of you, you can use the observation team. Rex decided to clarify right away that if they can't kill NPCs in the camp, then they can do whatever they want outside the camp, for which he received Ron's approval. Jill was also interested in how to increase strength and equipment in this game, since she would not like to lose her equipment without returning. To this, the main character explained that they need to kill zombies, from which they will receive crystals of corpses, and already for these crystals they will be able to get equipment and increase attributes. He also said that completing the tasks of non-player characters will increase their sympathy for the player, as well as increase the reputation of the shelter, which can also be changed for points. Also, one of the features of the players was a command system, after using which they could view information about their character. Using this command, Jill saw the status in front of her and absolutely did not understand how it worked and what kind of technology it was. This was the end of the brief briefing, and the head of the shelter wished the players to enjoy life in this world and fired a pistol, making it clear that the game had begun. The players immediately scattered around the territory who wanted to go where. Mia went into the forest to hunt and several more people followed her, who recognized her. It turned out that they were her fans. It was impossible to call Mia modest, because she was very self-confident and considered herself a game master, and the rest believed in it. Soon they came across a small group of zombies who immediately noticed the guests and were ready to attack. Mia took out a knife and was determined to destroy these zombies. Again, she thought that everything would be easy. But 3 minutes later, she was convinced of the opposite. The zombies in this game were not ordinary weaklings. Realizing that she would not be of any use in battle yet, she asked the main character if there were missions in this game that did not require combat skills. To which she received an ominous answer that if they did not want to fight, then they could well do farm work, such as tending the beds, digging up the garden, and more. Since Mia had no choice, she agreed to the task of plowing the land, but she did not have the feeling that she had become a slave. After a while, Ron enjoyed the sight of the players working and praised himself for such an idea. The voice of a man who wanted to purchase some equipment came from behind. It was the same commando named Rex. He had a mountain of crystals in his hands, and he wanted to exchange them for weapons. The main character could not understand where this man got such a number of corpse crystals, to which he received an unexpected answer that it was extremely easy to find a zombie and kill it, but he needed a weapon to increase his efficiency. The main character, without thinking for a long time, gave him a gun as a reward and waited for even greater success in the extermination of zombies. As soon as the man received the gun, he immediately began to examine it and quickly concluded that it was a Browning 1911, which was absolutely true. Realizing that the pistol was not enough for this man, the main character said that in the future, the rewards would be much better. When the player left, the main character thought that this player's strength might come in handy in the future. He had no time to move away from the last dialogue when a female voice called him behind his back, and the guy thought that something had already happened. This woman was Jill. She also wanted to try hunting zombies, but initially to have equipment and weapons, to which she was told that it could all be obtained for crystals by the troop. But she said she didn't have anything like that. Then it wasn't clear to Ron how she wanted to get crystals for equipment. Then Jill said that she could enroll in the game as much as needed, since all games are made for earnings. Ron replied that there is no enrollment function in this game, and all players are initially in an equal position, but he took note of this way of earning. This definitely angered Jill, and she said that money was all she had and she could easily buy this game. Then to stop it, the main character came close to her, lightly touched her chin, and said that the status of the real world here means nothing, and if Jill does not stop, he will punish her. However, Jill was too stubborn, and already realized that if you can't enroll in the usual way, then she will find another one. She received approval for this proposal since the game was absolutely free and did not restrict her as long as she followed the rules. Then Jill resorted to an unusual plan. She offered other players money for crystals, and she would pay the money in the real world. This offer was to everyone's liking, and already a large number of players offered her their crystals. The main character looked at it approvingly, because if you have money for such a trick, then you can quite use it. Now the deal took place in a different way, since Jill brought a large number of crystals and Ron had no reason to refuse her. At this time, other players handed over tasks to Erica, such as chopping firewood or plowing land. For her, such attention was still unusual, so it caused some discomfort, and she had to smile tightly. After she accepted the quests, the players were credited with a reward in the form of points, and they were happy because they could exchange them for tools or whatever else. They were very grateful to Erica and demanded even more tasks from her, for which she sent them to repair the house and collect medicinal ingredients. She absolutely did not understand what was wrong with these people and why they wanted to work so much, but she liked that she did not work full-time. A few days later, there was a meeting of the shelter, which was attended by the main character, Nick, Erica, and Chloe. The farm and the refugees were doing pretty well, and this was a great merit of the corpse dolls, who worked for a song. Erica stressed that these dolls are always energetic and full of energy, as if they like to work forever. The main character said that very little time will pass, and the territory will need to be expanded, and at this their meeting can be considered closed. But Chloe asked the main character to stay, because she had a few questions for the leader. Erica started teasing her that she wanted to confess her feelings to Ron, but the main character asked her to go first and stayed indoors himself. He didn't know what Chloe wanted to ask, but suggested that she not be shy and ask if she had any questions. Chloe suddenly became serious. She was like this very rarely, and asked the question that interested her, who really controls the dolls? This greatly puzzled the main character because he knew that Chloe was a smart girl, but that was putting it mildly. It was impossible for him to tell the truth, and he decided to lie that these were high-ranking people from other settlements who had nothing to do. Chloe thought it was strange, and she asked another question in which she wanted to know how it turned out that these people came to the main character. Realizing that there was no point in lying further, Ron put his hands on Chloe's shoulders and said that everything he was doing was all for them. And the revelation worked, because Chloe immediately agreed to help in any case. Erica suddenly ran in shouting that there was definitely something going on outside, and most likely something important. At this time, the guy accused Mia of stealing his crystals, and for this, she broke into his house. It was completely natural for Mia to steal from this guy because she knew he was a non-player character. By this point, the head came and asked what was going on, and what kind of division did these two arrange among themselves. The guy respected the head of the settlement and immediately turned to him, because he wanted to restore justice and punish this thief. But Mia believed that this does not violate the rules of the game, because there is complete freedom of action, so theft is allowed. This greatly angered the man, because she took not only crystals, but also a bulletproof vest, weapons, and even underwear. For the main character, it was not an easy choice what to do, because Mia is a well-known streamer and can greatly help in promoting the game. After thinking a little, he said that theft was allowed, but he suggested that they find out everything with their fists, and if she wins, then she is right, and if not, then she will return everything in double volume. As soon as such an offer was made, these two were already ready to rat each other out, so they immediately accepted it. Mia got into a fighting stance and asked her not to underestimate her, because she was engaged in many types of martial arts. But it definitely didn't help her as she missed the first blow to the face and collapsed to the ground. As soon as she fell, the man was not going to stop and decided to shake her soul out of her so that she would never steal again. The main character understood that the outcome of this battle was determined in advance, since people from his world were noticeably weaker than these embroiderers. At the end of the fight, Mia admitted her guilt and returned everything stolen to the rightful owner. Ron said that in the future this will become the rule, and if there are any controversial points, then solve them in the language of force. There was a group of guys sitting in an internet cafe, and she was surprised by the high scores of the game, especially from Mia, from whom getting a good score was not an easy task. Mia was sitting at home at the computer and communicating with her subscribers, very tired of a long game. She was drinking beer and was glad that her subscribers calmed down and went to eat, but they still had to go online again. Suddenly, Mia noticed that the beer was over, and the food too, so she invited the audience to take a walk to the store for purchase. So she found herself in a store that was quite impressive in size, and its shelves were bursting with the number of goods. She went to the right shelf and started looking to see if her favorite brand was sold out, and she was lucky because there was another jar on the shelf. At the moment when she reached for it and took it, a man's hand blocked her hand. Turning around, she saw a young guy who kindly offered her to take this jar for herself, if she wanted, of course. She was glad of such an offer, but it began to seem to her that she had seen this guy somewhere. And at one point, information from memory reached these two and they recognized each other. Mia and the head of the shelter met in the real world. After a while, the two lifted the beer bottles up because they were glad to meet such a meeting. Mia and Ron were sitting in the room. After such a coincidence, they decided to go to Mia's house and have a little drink. Now she knew that the guy was not an NPC, but a very real person, to which he said that it was all for the sake of improving the gameplay. The girl, as usual, behaved liberally, and even though she was afraid of the leader in the game, in real life she did not hesitate to call him ordinary, and even not very handsome. To this, the guy said that he could not expect that such a popular girl could have quite an ordinary life, because he thought there was no end to fans. And this perhaps was his main mistake, since he now found himself in her house, and also revealed his identity to the most inconvenient person. On the guy's assumptions, she said that she was not a news anchor, but quite even a gamer, and fans did not like her for her body and appearance. However, the main character had a different opinion on this and said that her body is actually very beautiful, as well as her appearance. This greatly embarrassed the girl, and she looked away a little, but then she looked at the guy and said that even if he said so, she would not be happy about it. The main character, of course, did not think standardly, and thought not only about her beauty, but also how she could be used to promote the game. But this was all secondary. In fact, he was interested in her opinion about the game from the point of view of an experienced player, and maybe she has some ideas for the game. Mia had several suggestions for this, so she suggested introducing a dungeon system for a variety of content, and also advised the main character to change his appearance to a game one as a player. The main character liked these ideas, and out of joy he hugged the girl very sincerely, which she clearly did not expect. At this, the main character decided to say goodbye to her and said that he would immediately return to the game and make changes to improve it. The door slammed shut and the girl was left alone with her thoughts. It was just as important to her that he listened to her, but it was also a shame that he didn't ask her name, because her nickname in the game was her real name. The other world, as always, lived its own life. Although it was apocalyptic, the sun shone as beautifully as the present, and nature and the forest were no worse. As it turned out, the system was able to create objects inside this world, which was what Ron needed, and he created a first-level dungeon, spending 500 points. After confirming this command, an image similar to a galaxy appeared on the screen, but it was the process of generating a dungeon. After a while, a portal similar to that image appeared in front of the main character. This was the dungeon. There was also an inscription above the portal that gave information about this dungeon. The main character was standing in front of the portal and hoped that it was not a waste of points, because if so, it would be a big loss. After a while, he spoke to the players on behalf of the head of the settlement, and informed the players that now the game has a system of dungeons in which they can earn something interesting. This was great news for the players because they had already started to miss the mundane topic of dungeons, and now they had the opportunity to clean them up. Meanwhile, the main character hid behind a stone and watched the reaction of the players. He began to understand Mia's words because on behalf of the NPCs, it is difficult for him to notice the discontent of the players. And he decided that he would not be an NPC. At that moment, his body began to change and lose its shape, thus the appearance editor worked in this world. In an instant, he transformed into a completely different person, which was another amazing skill of the system. Now he had long silver hair and a different appearance, which allowed him to pretend to be a player and look at the game from the other side. Mia was already gathering a group of those who wanted to go to the dungeon, since it was more expedient to go as a group. A hand was laid on her shoulder and she looked around. She was asked about the opportunity to join her group. When she turned to the speaker, she saw a guy with long silver hair who repeated the question about joining the team. After looking at the guy better, the girl just shone with his beauty. Because she looked strange, the guy asked if she was all right. This question made the girl wonder if they had seen each other before, because she had already heard it from someone. Ron realized that he was close to failure, and he had to lie. Most likely they had seen each other for a very long time, and he had to switch the topic to the dungeon. Since he was very attractive, Mia could not refuse him. As soon as they united, they were approached and asked if this was true. In front of them were two young guys who wanted to join them. They also offered to divide the loot from the dungeon equally, which was an honest offer. Mia got conceited again and pointedly made a smart look to show off, and asked the main character if he agreed, to which she received an affirmative answer. She was full of passion, and as soon as the team was formed, she offered not to waste time and move forward to conquer the dungeon. Ron was glad that she was a bit dumb and didn't recognize him. There shouldn't be any problems, since this is the simplest dungeon. People gathered in front of the portal in the dungeon. Many of them had already been there. They were waiting for their turn to try again. Those who had already been there said that it was very difficult, and most likely it was their equipment or level, which was not far from the truth. Mia came into this crowd. She attracted everyone's attention and declared that the first team to pass the dungeon would be hers. At that moment, Rex came out of the dungeon. He looked very rumpled. A notification appeared above the portal that he had successfully cleared the zombie forest dungeon. It was a very bad time for the girl, because after such a strong speech, she immediately screwed up. Since they could no longer be the first, she quickly changed the goal, saying that the main thing in this game is to survive, and the rest is secondary. The main character stopped Rex by taking him by the shoulder, who in turn did not understand why he got the attention of a stranger. The reason for the interest was simple. The guy just gave him a bottle of liquid, which was something like a first aid kit in this world. Rex was surprised by such kindness, because from the very beginning of the game there was no sign of friendliness from the players, so he said that he would not forget this help. But this gesture of kindness did not like Phil, a new member of the squad. He did not approve of such help, since supplies can be saved for yourself, and you do not need to give them to a stranger, to which he received an answer, "Mind your own business." This answer made him mad as hell, and he was about to give Ron a thrashing, but his friend named Tim calmed him down. After the conflict was settled, Mia began to open the passage to the dungeon. The transition was also unusual. All the band members were enveloped in light, and a glow appeared under their feet. The system notified that they would move to the dungeon in 3 seconds. After the countdown, they found themselves in a very dense forest resembling a jungle. The system also reported that they had 60 minutes to complete the dungeon, and the main goal was the boss. Mia was amazed by what she saw, because the terrain was radically different from the terrain in the camp, and she was glad that the creator of the game listened to her advice. The main character decided once again to deflect suspicion from himself and asked if she knew the creator of the game, to which the girl turned up her nose and joyfully declared that she had taught him everything. At that moment, Phil noticed something very strange, because his face expressed more despair than fear, and he pointed it out, asking the others to take a look too. What he was pointing at were snakes. There were a lot of snakes, even too many, and it made everyone wary. The animals did not wait long and attacked immediately with all their numbers, rushing to new visitors. The fact that it was snakes was a small problem because Mia hated them and was very much afraid of them. Ron cut down these weak monsters without any problems or effort. He commanded everyone to be careful. And it was necessary to be careful for a reason, because he knew that these snakes are poisonous. He also suggested how to fight them. Although there were a lot of snakes, they were not enough to cause serious harm, and the hunters, following the advice, calmly fought off the attack. The only one who was uneasy was Mia, because she thought snakes were very scary, and she grabbed one of them in the middle with her bare hands. In the end, she tore it in half, not having a cold weapon and being very angry at this situation in general. After throwing away the remains of the snake, she said that it was all very terrible, but the guys who witnessed this cruel scene were sure that she was really terrible. Suddenly, Phil screamed and there was horror on his face. He noticed something again that the others could not notice. Everyone was wondering what happened. He turned very pale and covered with cold sweat, showed his hand, on which there were 2 small holes, and said that he had been bitten. He fell to his knees and begged the others to leave him and go on. Blood was oozing from his hand, and his health was gradually declining. The main character calmed him down by saying that this snake is not so poisonous, so you should not worry. You just need to suck out the toxins. After hope was found, Tim offered him his help and said that even though they had not known each other for a long time, they were now like brothers. The further spectacle looked more like something obscene. Tim began to suck the poison out of his friend's shoulder, and for some reason he blurred like a girl. Ron and Mia were very happy to see this scene. It was evident from their faces, especially from the blood that was pouring out of their eyes. The girl offered the main character to leave with her. The guy had no reason to refuse because it's better than watching brotherly love. When they left, the main character asked what she wanted to tell him, which she could not say in front of everyone. She pointed to the health bar, which was gradually decreasing, and said that she was also bitten by a snake. It was unexpected, and the main character immediately offered to get rid of the poison, since she had no more than 5 minutes left. But contrary to all expectations, the place for which this slender and beautiful girl was bitten turned out to be her breasts, which was not surprising considering her size. After the place was determined, the main character began to hand over the back a little, because this was not part of his plans, but the girl insisted on it, citing that it was just a game. And since the guy had no other choice, he agreed and pressed the girl against a tree for embarrassing her very much. And what was the surprise of the girl when the guy began to suck the poison out of her chest, because the sensations from these actions were quite real. The main character liked this procedure, and he jokingly said that he thanked her for the treat, to which the girl blushed and told no one to talk about it, because she would lose her status. At this time, Tim finished extracting the poison from his friend, and he was very glad that nothing was threatening him now. He also said that he could ask him for anything. Tim responded to this gratitude with acceptance, but there was a small problem because he was also bitten, and now he needed the help of a friend. Phil did not hesitate to say that he would help his little brother and suck out the poison, because that's what real comrades do. And he regretted it very much, because his friend turned his back to him and began to pull down his pants, saying that his back was defenseless. At this time, the main character and Mia came out of the forest, who were going to move on if the bros finished with the poison, and were again stunned to see a new picture. Tim was lying on the ground with his pants down, and Phil was sitting behind him, extracting poison from a friend's buttock, but since it looked very suspicious, they immediately began to justify themselves, but it was too late. There were 49 minutes left to complete the dungeon. The group moved to a new location, and a swamp appeared there. Mia didn't understand why the dungeon was called the Zombie Forest, since they hadn't met a single zombie during their time inside. Phil calmed her down by saying that even if zombies appear, she has nothing to worry about, because they will protect her. To which the girl made a face and said that she was not eager to be protected by fecal lovers, and the guy started yelling that he did not eat them. Suddenly, from the swamp they were passing by, a sound was heard, not like those that a swamp should make. Suddenly, a monster jumped out of the swamp behind Phil. They had not seen such an enemy yet, and they were not ready for such a sharp attack. The monster jumped on his back and bit him on the head, and a notification appeared above his head that this monster is called a swamp zombie, and he disguises himself very well for an attack. The main character reacted instantly and immediately drew his sword and rushed to the attack, asking his friend to duck. His target was the monster's head, but everything was complicated by the fact that it was very close to the man's head, but the guy was able to direct the blade correctly, and his hand did not waver. Having carried out a horizontal swing, he was able to hit the monster on the head, and it was a centimeter from the head of a friend. Since swamp zombies did not stand out by force, then the body of these zombies was not very strong, so part of the monster's head easily separated from the body. The monster fell to the floor already dead, and Phil admired the accuracy of the main character's blow, because it was very dangerous. But the main character was not very happy, because he still missed a little and touched Phil's head, from which blood began to fly out like a fountain. But Mia tore them away from the dialogue and asked them not to be distracted and look towards the swamp. The heads of monsters began to appear from the swamp thicket, which now did not try to hide, but on the contrary wanted to attack people, and there were quite a lot of them there. The main character wanted to deal with the zombies on his own, because they were only the first level, but he understood that if this continued, the players would not be able to train. The appearance of such a pile of enemies did not bother Phil at all, but only on the contrary awakened anger for the damaged bald spot, and now he could throw it out. The first thing he did was get rid of his t-shirt by tearing it off himself. This was preparation for a reception called muscle strengthening. In an instant, his body became 3 times larger, and it could not be said that he became bigger because of weight or fat. He was enlarged by muscles that were clearly visible. The main character was very surprised by this. Tim explained that this is Phil's ability, and since he is a fitness trainer in real life, he quickly mastered it in the game. The zombies decided not to pull and attack the man who was now a priority target for them, because he was bigger. But such an attack only angered Phil once again, and he began to strain his whole body with anger. The next moment there was a blow, and his axe cut the heads of 2 zombies at once without apparent effort. The main character was amazed at such an unexpected strength of the player, and was very glad that the abilities from real life were taken into account in the game. After chopping a few more zombies, Phil not only did not calm down, but only on the contrary became even more furious, and he expected new rivals. And suddenly his body was engulfed in smoke. There was a complete feeling that it was a smoke bomb, but something still didn't add up. When the smoke cleared, a dead and exhausted Phil stood in place of the formidable muscular man, who himself did not understand what had happened. Mia wanted to find out what happened, and Tim explained that since Phil has a low level, he can only maintain this ability a little, and then weakens. This was the collapse of the logic of the main character, because since it was true, it was not worth using it so thoughtlessly, especially on ordinary opponents. While he was perplexed, he received a notification from the system about an additional task, in which it was proposed to destroy 10 enemies with one blow in exchange for a muscle-strengthening skill. 10 enemies came out of the swamp as ordered, which was ideal for this task, since it was not a problem for the main character. While he was fighting, he advised others to climb trees so they wouldn't get hurt. It was somehow doubtful for the partners because they thought that the zombies would climb there, but Mia advised them to just climb and not contradict. The monsters were rapidly approaching the shore, and they were very aggressive, which was clearly seen by the speed of their approach. However, the main character had the means to complete the task in the best possible way. He began to take out a blade charged with electricity from the scabbard. The plan was pretty simple. He decided to use his knowledge and use electricity to his advantage, so he lowered the sword into the water and gave a discharge. The discharge was so powerful that the electric waves were visible to the naked eye, and they quickly ran all over the pond. For zombies, this was a fatal trick, since the water conducted an electric current well, and he, without losing his power, beat them, burning them from the inside. This was enough to complete the task because there were no conditions for the fulfillment, and such a cunning method was quite suitable. Since the task was completed, a system window popped up to confirm this and reported that a new skill was obtained for the task. This method surprised his teammates. Mia was amazed by the power of this technique, and Tim was surprised by the originality of the approach. Suddenly, Mia felt something grab her leg and pull her towards it. It turned out to be Phil, who was so weak that he just lay in the swamp, unable to get up, and asked for help from the girl. But the girl could not understand that it was her friend, and with fright pulled out her leg and hit him in the head, from which he began to drown. But the main character and Tim were not so stupid and noticed that she hit Phil, who was now helplessly drowning. The girl reacted to this with a little mockery, saying that he was no different from a zombie and he scared her himself. By this point, Phil was able to find the strength to get out of the water, but he was very angry that his partner almost killed him. The girl laughed at this remark and said that she had kicked him lightly, taking everything said at her own expense as a compliment, but it was not so. In her defense, she hinted that no one asked Phil to use such an ability, after which he became absolutely useless. Ron drew their attention to a red blob of light, above which there was a notification from the system that the boss would show up soon. He immediately took out his katana because he understood that the fight would start from second to second, and warned his comrades about the danger. After a few seconds, a boss really appeared. It looked like a plant, only this plant had a huge mouth with many teeth. It was called a corpse flower. Phil was happy and angry at the same time. He was going to teach this boss an excellent lesson, and he was already starting to move in his direction. But the main character and Mia, who know how it will end, ordered him not to approach the boss, since he will not be of use in melee. Phil didn't understand what the problem was, and the main character explained that the side effect of Phil's ability was too strong, and it was better for him to fight at a distance. His comrades objected to this, saying that they specialize in close combat, and weapons and ammunition are not freely available because they are beginners. The main character reacted calmly to this, and said that it was necessary to tell him about it earlier, because he had something in his possession. Tearing off his jacket, he showed that he has a pretty serious arsenal, which should be enough for their needs in this battle. The guys were very surprised by his arsenal, and they stood rooted to the spot looking at him, unable to take their eyes off, because they had never seen such a thing. At this time, Mia was already fighting with the boss and shooting at him, but of course this did not have much effect, since there was not enough firepower. She noticed that her 3 comrades are now busy with absolute bullshit and asked them to help her, because she can't cope. While she was shouting this, shots from a machine gun and pistols rang out behind her. The guys decided what to take for themselves and began attacking the boss. The main character noticed that it was good that now many people play computer shooters. Because of this, they could use weapons at the level of intuition. After a few minutes, Mia noticed that the boss was not losing any life at all, since they had been attacking for a long time, and he had no less health points, and it was strange. The main character suspected something bad in this. Mia showed that the health points are lowered, but immediately returned to their place. There was a swamp zombie in one of the tentacles of this corpse flower, and from everything it turned out that he attacked everyone indiscriminately. As it turned out, the zombie was captured for a reason, and the boss threw it into his mouth, after which he swallowed it and his health points rose to 100 again. The main character quickly realized that boss uses zombies as food, and at the same time pulls out their health points for himself, thus replenishing his stock. Mia was not very happy about this situation and did not understand how they could fight in this case, to which Ron said that there was nothing terrible about it, and when the corpses ran out, boss would not be able to restore his life. At that moment, one of the tentacles rushed towards Mia, and since she didn't notice it, it grabbed her unhindered. The main character, of course, was right that when the zombies run out, the monster will stop replenishing health, but he did not finish that the monster will start eating alive. The guys realized that it was impossible to delay any longer, and they needed to save their partner. They furiously rushed to the attack, trying to make it in time. But the monster was in no hurry to eat her, and began to grab her legs with tentacles, and one climbed into the chest area, which the girl really didn't like, and she tried to shout to the guys. But now, having seen a beautiful picture, these three brave warriors could not take their eyes off what was happening, and simply could not help her until they saw what would happen next. And when the monster put its tentacle under her t-shirt, she finally lost her composure because of three perverts who were in no hurry to help her. She gathered her thoughts and took out a gun and shot off this damn tentacle that had been holding her all this time. Only she did not calculate that if she cut it, she would fall down from a great height, because this tentacle was holding her. Now she was afraid to crash to death. But the main character had seen enough of it, and this time decided to really help. He ran up and grabbed the girl in his arms, which prevented her from crashing. She thanked him, but for him it was a trifle. Several tentacles flew in their direction, and Mia began to worry whether they would be able to dodge. But there was nothing to it, because the main character perfectly mastered the art of the sword, so he easily cut these tentacles without letting go of the girl from his hands. The monster roared, because now it was really painful for him, and he could not restore his health, which means something had to be done. Following the scream, a deafening sound rang out, which swept through the entire dungeon, as it was very strong. This noise attack worked, and almost all the band members covered their ears because the noise was unbearable, and it seemed that the eardrums would break. However, Ron did not feel any damage. Since his level was clearly higher than the others, he prepared a charge on his sword and decided to attack immediately. He jumped up on the spot in order to drive the sword deeper into the ground, because it was the most reasonable idea at that time. He did so, and when he landed, he stuck the sword into the ground and released an electric discharge that spread across the surface. The plant was powerfully electrocuted, from which it was immobilized for a while, which gave hope that this attack would be quite enough. At the end, when the discharge ended, the plant circled and began to spread to the ground, making it clear with all its appearance that the battle was over. Ron understood that this monster was only level 2, and he didn't need to use his full strength to destroy it, so he sheathed his sword. But he didn't notice that the monster was still alive, and he was slowly recovering from such a powerful attack. Eventually, the plant rose, and the system notified that the boss was angry and therefore evolved and became stronger. Phil liked this news because he understood that after defeating such a boss, they would receive good rewards, but Tim was not sure if they could win. The main character had a misunderstanding of the situation because he knew that the conductivity of the current was a strong attack, but despite this, for some reason, the boss almost did not suffer. Mia understood a little about such issues and explained that grass is not a good conductor, and since the charge was on the ground, he spent half of the force along the way, and the boss is also a plant in the end. This will almost not work on him. The main character didn't like that she reported it after he attacked, so he gave her a snap. The monster began to spit venom, rather large projectiles that flew like large bullets at the players. The main character reacted and dodged this unexpected attack. He noticed that after the evolution, the boss had new opportunities and attacks. The poison flew past, missing the target, and hit straight into the tree standing behind, and it immediately began to melt. The main character immediately realized that things were bad for them, and these poisonous bullets were very dangerous. He turned to the guys from the group and warned them about the danger. But it was, to put it mildly, too late. The two partners were covered with poison from head to toe, and the guy could not understand how they got caught like that. Mia's plaintive voice was heard behind her, asking for help. The main character looked around, assuming the worst option. When he turned around, he saw that the clothes on Mia's body were starting to melt and disappear quickly, while the poison seemed harmless to the body. Literally a few seconds later, an almost completely naked girl stood in front of the main character, who was clearly not happy with this outcome. Ron quickly took off his jacket and, like a true gentleman, offered it to his partner so that she could cover her body. A familiar sound rang out from behind. The monster fired a volley of poisonous bullets again, and they flew straight at these two. The main character turned around and with one movement of the sword was able to destroy all 3 bullets, which was a pretty good move. However, this method was not very effective because although the guy's swordsmanship was good, it was impossible to stop such large lumps of liquid with a thin sword, and naturally part of the poison would fall on the reflecting one. While the main character was puzzling over how to defeat this monster, Phil's voice came from behind him, who came up with something. He explained that in real life he is a chemistry teacher and understands it well, so he has a synthesis skill. The essence of this skill was simple. He could create new items using 2 parts of something, which was not so much useful, since it could be done by himself. Phil said he had gasoline and fabric, and if he used his synthesis, he would get a combustible mixture. After he used the skill, a cocktail of hammers turned out, quite popular in games, but insanely effective. Picking up the bottle, the main character said that Phil just connected 2 objects for everything, and he himself is capable of this. Molotov cocktail was a great idea because the electric discharge had no effect, and now you have to try to burn it, and suddenly it will work. And with these thoughts, he threw this jar straight into the monster's face. He could only hope that it would help. The bottle broke on impact, and the monster was engulfed in flames. This time it was clear that he did not like it at all, and he was actually dying. After a few minutes, the boss of this level burned out, which was confirmed by the system, and that now they are entitled to a reward for killing the boss. An unusual chest appeared in front of each player, and this greatly pleased them since this dungeon was not simple. Phil was the first to open the chest and take out his reward. It turned out to be a can of protein, which increased endurance, and now he could use his skill longer. Tim received iron armor, which also had effects, one of which was bullet resistance, that is, it was impossible to pierce it with a bullet. Mia also took out a skill book from the chest, the effect of which was the headshot skill, after using which her strength would increase by 300%. Ron was the last of the company to open the chest. He sat down and slowly lifted the lid. He was wondering what kind of reward he would receive. Looking into the chest, he was confused as if there was nothing there, but a bright light was coming from the chest. The others were also wondering what the main character got, and when they saw it, they were surprised and thought it was the best reward. Contrary to all the expectations of the protagonist, his reward turned out to be an egg, and even the system did not know whose it was, but gave a hint that something would hatch out of it. Since that moment, 3 days have passed. The settlement has expanded more and more, and has already begun to go beyond the old territory. There were more new players in the game, and now all players could get statuses. They got this opportunity for promotion in the game. This was great news for the old players, as they had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and now the system will evaluate them. A new player noticed Mia and joyfully ran up to her. He wanted to learn from her tips on how to level up at the start of the game. She reacted calmly to this, and since she remembered how strong zombies were, especially at the start of the game, she advised cutting trees and plowing the land, that is, everything that she did herself. As it turned out, this guy was her fan and had never seen her live, but now she gave him advice, and he decided to keep up with his idol and got to work. The old players worked quietly in the garden and did not hurry anywhere. After completing this task, they were going to buy better tools for the garden and equipment. The main character was sitting in the main office of the settlement, and Chloe was telling him about the news. She said that the new people were working even harder than the old ones. The main character liked it, because he didn't have to worry about expanding the shelter, and now this process happened automatically. However, Chloe said that not everything is so good. Because there are already too many people, they have an overabundance of labor, and they need to think about new bases. The main character understood this perfectly, but from the point of view of the player, because if they are in the same shelter all the time, they will get tired of it sooner or later, and new items are simply necessary. In this case, the guy asked the girl if there were any territories near their headquarters, to which she said that there were such, but they were occupied by zombies. However, there was one problem, that all the strongholds were located on the territory of the central settlements, and in order to expand, you would need to log in. She showed a map on which it was clearly visible that the lands had long been divided between villages, since the government ceased to exist as such. Also, the central settlement was divided between the main forces, and their owners were called shield muzzlers, because they were the strongest of the awakened. This did not greatly puzzle the main character, since this was about what was supposed to happen. But since they want to expand the territories, they cannot avoid a conflict. At that moment, Erica ran into the room, who brought bad news. A group came from the central settlement to collect taxes. This surprised Chloe very much, but the main character was not a bit scared and went to deal with this small problem. In front of the settlement, there was a fat man who introduced himself as a tax inspector from the central settlement, and that residents were obliged to give 50% of the products every month. However, one of the locals was forgiving, because when this territory belonged to a gang of wolves, everyone didn't care, and now they owe something. To this objection, the tax inspector simply took out a pistol and pointed it in the direction of the resident, clearly intending to pull the trigger. Since he was not a good-natured person, he did so. He pulled the trigger and realizing that it would kill someone. But after the shot, he was very surprised and did not understand how this was possible, because he definitely fired a pistol. Tim was standing in front of the resident in his iron armor. There was a small dent on the breastplate. This indicated that he had extinguished the blow. This chubby man did not understand what had happened, because he shot and hit, and this man did not seem to notice. When the resident realized what had happened, he asked Tim if he was okay, because he did not believe in the reliability of this armor. Tim smiled and said it was nothing, because he had this thing that would protect him from everything. The newcomers who saw this were completely convinced that this player was abnormal, since he blocked the bullet with his body. By this time, the main character managed to approach. He introduced himself to the tax inspector and asked what was going on and what they wanted. The tax inspector decided to change his words a little and offered residents protection if they pay taxes. But the main character calmly asked him why, when this territory belonged to wolves, when distress signals were received from it, no one from the center came to help. The inspector smiled at this and said that they had some difficulties and they barely survived themselves, and now they are ready to help. Then Ron decided to put the squeeze on him with the following statement that the center did not come to people's aid when they needed it, and now they decided to collect taxes. Since it was a refusal, the inspector decided to act as usual and threw in a pistol, ordering his men to raise their rifles too. It was a pure threat. Since his men were equipped with good equipment, he thought he would be able to intimidate the main one, and everything would be fine. But the main character was not only not scared, but also remained absolutely calm. In response to this rude gesture, he simply snapped 2 fingers. And behind him appeared a lot of players, each of whom had good equipment and excellent weapons, which meant their advantage. The inspector could not understand how such a small settlement had so many weapons, and he asked the players about it. They openly said that they get weapons from dungeons, for bonuses or for simple farming. They said it with very pleased faces. Then the inspector decided to retreat, because he recognized that they were much stronger than them, and the best thing now would be to retreat. But the main character was not going to let go of the man who shot one of the players so easily, and he decided that now it was his turn to shoot the inspector. Turning around, the inspector realized that the main character was aiming at his ass, and he was yelling incomprehensibly, not knowing what the main character wanted to do. And all he had to do was just shoot the inspector. There was a pop, and several splashes of blood jumped out of his buttock. The guards picked up the inspector and carried him away, because they could not answer, fearing for their lives, and he did not calm down and yelled that they would answer for it. Mia stood at the head of the protesting pile of players and showed the torch to the departing people. The other players also shouted that they would not dare to come to their territory anymore. Chloe was terrified, because this could lead to an inevitable conflict, and for her reasons, it would be more logical to unite with the central settlement. To this, the main character simply replied that if he had backed down, he would have lost most of the popular support, and these people will never get enough. Plus, there are more and more people and supplies in the settlement, so something needs to be done. Erica stood at a loss because the newcomers were generally fearless, and in such a situation even she, a seasoned hunter, began to worry a little. That's just the main character knew why they were so fearless, because for them it was just a game, and in real life they are afraid of almost everything. Anyway, the central settlement was central and very large after all. It was a city, some part of which was well preserved. A graceful man in a red suit, whose name was Drac, was sitting on a chair. He had just learned that his inspector had been attacked by residents of the shelter. The inspector was sitting on his knees and said that any attempt on his life meant that these people threatened the fight itself. This was indeed the case, but there was something wrong in the expression of his boss's face. It was somehow sinister, and he also had snake eyes. The inspector did not notice this and began to beg his master to teach the residents of that shelter a lesson, because they deserved it. Drac said that he had heard about a young man named Ron, who had done a lot of things lately, and he would like to meet him, but he could not go empty-handed. The inspector did not understand what his master wanted, and suggested to him that the junior staff would prepare everything necessary. But his owner said that it was not necessary to go somewhere at all, because he had already found a gift. He put his finger to the inspector's forehead. He already understood what was being discussed, but it was too late to fix something. His master decided that his head would be a gift for Ron. In an instant, a snake came out of the back of the inspector's head, piercing through his head, which of course quickly killed the poor man. A couple of days later, there was a fair in the shelter. All the players and ordinary residents were selling their items and goods. As a rule, high-quality things were not always sold at such events. For example, these merchants sold an almost unusable shield and sword. Since one product could be bought because of the apparent lack of another, these merchants often quarreled over an undesirable neighborhood. The main character was inspecting his possessions and was surprised at how quickly the shelter grew in size. Most likely it was due to the arrival of new players. He decided to check it using the status window, and indeed there were too many people in the shelter. Because of this, there was a negative effect, and people's mood dropped and the productivity of the shelter fell. The system demanded to take any measures, but the main character did not want to open a new shelter and understood that in this case difficulties could not be avoided. Suddenly, a very expensive car drove up to the shelter. It somehow resembled a Lamborghini, which means its owner was a wealthy man. Such a curiosity in the post-apocalyptic world immediately attracted the attention of all those present, because this cannot be seen every day. When the car stopped, its doors slowly opened and people began to climb out of it. The new guests in the shelter were two strangers, a man in a rather expensive outfit and a woman, obviously his assistant. This man immediately introduced himself and said that he was the manager of the central district, and he would like to talk to the head of this settlement. The locals did not like it because they remembered the last visit from the central settlement, so they began to drive away the guests, not even wanting to listen. But this nice young man bowed to these simple hard workers and said that he had already dealt with his subordinate, who had caused inconvenience to the residents of this settlement. His subordinate opened the box and took out the head of the tax inspector who came here before them. This both frightened those present and assured them that this person had come for other matters. The main character could not ignore such an important guest and came up to greet him, and he also asked him to come along with him if he wanted to discuss something. Drac was amazed by the appearance of his interlocutor. It gave him a true connoisseur of style, and he agreed to go to the office. But before he left, he told his subordinate to guard the entrance, and if something went wrong, she had to report it. The two entered a spacious room, in the center of which was a table and many chairs. This was the main hall of the shelter. The subordinate of the head of the central district obediently took a position near the entrance. She had a rather serious look. 3 players began to discuss it. because for them, it was a new NPC character, and Mia was surprised how well it was worked out. They also had a hunch that a secret quest might appear. Mia realized that the other players were afraid to start a dialogue with this girl and decided to start first in order to set an example to the guys. But as soon as she wanted to move in her direction, she was stopped by Rex, who did not like this idea, and he warned her not to get involved with this girl. But this did not stop Mia. It just so happened that she was too self-confident and therefore thought that she would succeed the first time, because she knows how to flirt with girls. She approached this girl and punched the wall. Taking a confident position, she invited the girl to go to her room because she has a great bed. It was an obvious hint. The stranger was interested in this proposal, and she said that if she wanted something like this, then she would have to defeat her in battle first, and if it worked out, then her body would be at the complete disposal of the winner. The guys who heard this immediately blushed, because they were not close to the girls yet. They could not believe in such an offer. Mia immediately accepted this challenge and began to knead her fists. She definitely thought she could win. In the office at that time, there was a casual conversation between the two heads of settlements. There was a map of the area on the table. The main character did not understand why Drac came to his settlement, so he asked him about it directly. Drac, in turn, did not beat around the bush and inform him that he was interested in this settlement and was ready to buy it, and if Ron agreed, then a place in paradise was provided for him. The main character did not intend to give up the dialogue so quickly, so he asked if there was still such a place in this world. But Drac spoke quite confidently, and it was clear that he believed in his words, so he said that this was quite possible. He offered the main character everything, and explained that as long as someone has the power, the whole world can become a paradise for him. He also said that the main character should not worry about the inhabitants of this settlement, and he would take all these troubles on himself. The main character showed a friendly face because this offer was really tempting, and Drac was already sure that he had won. But after the friendly, the main character's face expressed dissatisfaction, and his final answer was refusal. This fairly angered the head of the central settlement, and he demanded an explanation for this refusal because he considered the guy a smart person. The answer was very simple, because the main character loved freedom, and he did not want to become a bird that was locked in a cage. This angered Drac even more, and he already began to show his snake nature. He said that he had already heard similar, and the fate of this man was not good. The main character did not want to know the details and offered this businessman a deal. It clearly interested him, and he wanted to know what. The main character took the map and pointed to the trade route through which the caravans of the central settlement went. He knew that a gang of Vulcan lived there, which inconvenienced the settlement. Drac said that this group occupied the metallurgical plant and is quite strong, because there have already been military expeditions there, and not one has been crowned with success. Then the main character took out a knife and stuck it exactly in the place where this gang was located on the map. He offered to deal with this group, and in return, the central settlement would cease to annoy his settlement. But Drac didn't believe in the success of this operation, so he wondered what would happen if they failed. The main character said that if they lost, the shelter would belong to the central settlement, so in any case, the head did not lose anything from such a deal. This state of affairs suited Draca, and since he was a serious person, he decided to sign a contract that confirmed the deal. As soon as they signed this contract, Drac hurried to leave the settlement and wished good luck in this mission. Ron wasn't going to see his guest off, but he heard some noise on the street and he had to look at what happened there. There was a bunch of players lying in front of the entrance to the building and a serious girl towered over them. It was obvious that she had laid everyone down. Drac was stunned by the girl's behavior and decided to find out what had happened, to which she replied that they were just playing. With such a picture in mind, Drac decided to gloat a little and said that the skills of Ron's subordinates were not very good, and they could not withstand the onslaught of the Vulcan gang. But this did not affect the main character in any way, and he replied that they were like a bunch of stray dogs. If they wanted to eat, they would break any bones. On such a pleasant note, the guests got into the car and left the settlement, and the main character watched them and marveled at the strength of this girl. This girl's name was Now, and Drac asked her what she thought about these people, and she replied that they were weak, but she did not see the strength of all, so she could not give an exact answer. But something still bothered her, because while she was fighting with them, she did not leave the feeling that these people were not afraid to die. The head of the central settlement calmed her down and said that such people usually die first, and that is why he is sure of Ron's loss. Meanwhile, the players who were put down by now began to come to their senses and began to wonder if they were too reckless. The main character decided to make an announcement and announced that a time-limited event had begun in the game, which was called Defeat the Volcano Gang. All participants in this event will receive a reward. This was both good and not so good news for all players. Phil decided to find out what the difference between this event and the dungeon was. The main character explained to the players that in this event, enemies do not respawn, and they will receive points for each, and special rewards for every 3 enemies killed. After he finished talking about the awards, Mia immediately moved forward to perform this event. The main character decided to ask her where she was going, because he hadn't finished talking about this event yet. She was as enthusiastic as usual and said that whoever comes first will receive the main award, so she goes first. Even in such a simple situation, she was able to distinguish herself, and the main character showed her that the gang is in the other side. Erica approached the main character. She was obviously worried. She knew about the contract, but the Vulcan gang was much stronger than the wolves, and she was worried about the guys. Even realizing that this was actually the case, the main character was sure that they would cope, and Erica did not understand where such confidence came from. And the main character decided to explain to her why these people will cope with such a task, even if it is more difficult. After all, they were more like the 4 elements of disaster for this world than ordinary hunters or bandits. In a small hut, men were shouting discontentedly. They demanded that the tenants get out of the house, because it was time to pay for protection. The woman was sitting on her knees and holding a handful of crystals in her hands and asked to take them all as payment. But the man was offended by such a gesture, and he decided that she took them for some beggars and knocked the crystals out of her hands. Another bandit took out a canister of gasoline, opened it, and began to pour the contents. It was obvious why he was doing it. He started pouring gasoline on the little daughter of this woman, who was holding her teddy bear in her arms. She was crying because she was scared. This soulless man lit a lighter and demanded that the woman tell where she kept her jewelry, otherwise she would watch her daughter burn. The woman realized that the worst was about to happen. She fell face down on the floor, bowing and praying that they would let her daughter go, because they really have nothing. But this angered the bandit even more, because he was sure that the woman did not want to tell the truth, so he ordered action. The woman raised her face. She screamed and begged the bandits not to do it, because it was too cruel even for this world. But these pleas did not reach the ears of these inhuman people, and the bandit, smiling mockingly, let go of the lighter. The girl squeezed her eyes shut so as not to see it. She squeezed the bear even tighter and called her mother for help. Suddenly a hand appeared and grabbed a lighter over the girl's head. The bandits could not have expected this. The main character was the one who saved the girl. He carelessly brought a lighter to a cigarette and lit it, asking if these 2 were from the Volcano gang. The bandit was surprised that since this man, knowing who dared to interfere with them, it was akin to suicide. Together with the main character was Mia. She decided to divide the bandits. Since there were 2 of them, she decided to take on a guy with a mohawk. He was definitely offended by her statement about her hairstyle, and he pulled out a flamethrower without hesitation. A flame began to fly rapidly towards the girl, which was quite dangerous for a person, since it could burn him alive. Mia was engulfed in flames and completely engulfed her. She immediately started yelling that she was very hot. The bandit was only amused. He was glad to see someone burning alive. He shouted that she would be baptized and burned to the ground. The main character decided to bring the girl to her senses and decided to remind her that she is a game character and she cannot be hurt. Since she had a reflex of her consciousness that fire is hot, she did not immediately realize that she did not feel pain from it. At that moment, the bandit started backing away, because his only weapon was useless against her, and this scared him. Then the girl, engulfed in flames, rushed towards the bandit. She was determined to strike him. And she succeeded. After a good acceleration, she hit him in the face with all her might, from which he flew back. That's just because she was engulfed in flames. After the blow, it spread to the bandit, and he began to burn alive. The second bandit realized that they could not win, because the comrade had already died. He said that even if he was killed, the Vulcan gang would not calm down. But he did not know what these people were thinking, but the main character explained to him that he would not kill him. A deafening cry of pain rang out over the forest, from which even birds flew up from the trees. When the bandit opened his eyes, there were several people in front of him, and the first thing he realized was that he would not be able to escape. Since he was tied to a chair, he could only talk. He did not understand who these people were and why he was brought here. The main character made a stony face and said that they needed information about Vulcan's gang, and if he cooperated, he would not be harmed. The bandit's answer was categorical. He was insulted while his master was protecting him. He was not afraid, at least he said so. A stick appeared out of the darkness at one end of which a flame was smoldering, and it was clear why it was needed. This stick turned out to be a red-hot iron that Rex was holding in his hands, and he was sure that since the bandit was not afraid of fire, then this was clearly not going to endure. The bandit's face showed that he was scared, but he said that he was a member of the Vulcan gang and had been baptized, and even if he was burned with iron, he would not back down from his own. But Rex asked him why he thought that he would be burned, and then the bandit finally stopped understanding what they would do with him. Rex, with a calm face, informed the prisoner that he would insert this metal rod into his ass, and a temperature of 800 degrees Celsius would turn his guts into dirt. It was clear that this guy was not joking and was really going to pull this off, so the bandit shifted in his chair. Even though he tried to seem fearless, in the end he burst into tears and agreed to tell everything, if only this piece of iron would be removed. Rex calmly threw the metal rod aside and said that everything turned out to be easier than he thought. Turning to his comrades, he asked if everything was all right, because it was not very pleasant to see this, but everyone immediately put their hands behind them and said that everything was fine. The main character was impressed by how quickly Rex was able to get information from the enemy, and especially his threats. He wanted to find out where he learned it. Rex answered without hesitation that this place was Afghanistan, and this surprised the main character even more. Again, if you evaluate the appearance of this man, it was clear that he was telling the truth, and the main character decided that such a frame should not be missed. At this time, the bandit asked that if he told everything he knew or important information for them, he would be released. Then the main character portrayed maximum friendliness, spread his hands to the sides and said that it was true, because they were not demons. The bandit began to tell that his leader's name is Vulcan, and he is a pyromaniac, and over the years the number of arson attacks and victims is only growing. In addition to all this man was so ruthless that his hobby was to watch live people burn. The players listened to this description and were delighted with the study of this villain, of course. They could not know that it was all real and thought that this was a game plot. The main character was satisfied with this information, but he still had questions, and he asked if the volcano had a lot of treasures, since it was rumored that he had robbed a lot of people. The bandit answered this question without hesitation, saying that he had heard that his leader had a lot of gold, but the main character was interested in how much and where it was. However, the bandit did not know where the treasures were. According to him, many tried to find them, but could not. But the main character already smelled gold. He imagined how he would finish this case, and he would have a fortune in which he could lie around without a murmur. Since the leader stopped asking questions, Rex decided to find out what kind of weapons the Vulcan gang had, since it was no less valuable information. From the information of the bandit, it followed that there were about 100 people in the gang, and everyone had a Molotov cocktail, a flamethrower, and other weapons. He also said that the territory where the base is located is equipped with mines, and it will not be safe to approach from the front. Since attacking from the outside was a dangerous and obviously losing tactic, Rex suggested sneaking inside and attacking from there. The main character liked this idea and said that when the bandit returns, he will take them with him. He also said that after joining the gang, he would have to undergo the rite of baptism of the volcano, but the bandit did not know about it. Then the main character explained that the essence of the ritual is that your hand is burned with a flame, and if you can bear it, you will pass. For the bandit, this was not such an easy test, and he was clearly nervous. The people in the room were clearly not happy with it. Then the bandit finally began to realize that it was definitely not people in front of him, because people can't help but be afraid of pain. He began to think that they were monsters. The territory of the volcano's base was dug out to the ground and dotted with crosses, on each of which burned bodies of people hung. The main character, Rex and Mia, stood in front of the volcano and asked to join their gang, because they had heard about its greatness. Vulcan sat on a huge throne and indifferently said that since they came here, they knew about the condition of joining the gang. From that moment, the acting game began. Ron said that nothing was a pity for the sake of the volcano, and they prepared for the ritual. Mia screamed that she didn't care, even in oil or in sauce. The leader liked this enthusiasm, and he said that there were 3 of them, and they needed to choose which of them would start the test first. The main character volunteered to be the first to pass this test. Only since he was not a player, he felt the pain differently. Respectively, he came up with another way. He walked up to the table and without hesitation put his hand on it, thereby showing his readiness. The bandit standing next to him held a flamethrower in his hands. He was sure that nothing would work out for the newcomers, since not everyone is able to pass such a test. Without waiting for a long time, he pulled the trigger, and a jet of flame flew out of the flamethrower. The essence of this test was to endure severe pain, so you voluntarily put your hand up and they started burning it out with fire. However, the main character was a little hesitant before the start of the test because he was a human and thought it would hurt, but he was not hot. Again, this is a performance, so the main character raised his burning hand and said that he expected more from the volcano test. His behavior made the bandit very angry, and he said that this was not the limit of his power, and now the main character will experience double firepower. The main character did not expect such a turn, because he thought that the test would end there, but a new jet of flame was already flying towards his hand. When the main character pretended to feel the flames, the bandit started jumping for joy and shouting that this is the power of the volcano, and now the guy will have to beg for mercy, otherwise his hand will burn. But contrary to all expectations, the main character absolutely did not feel the fire. He was on the contrary pleased. Other players watched this dedication and were shocked that their leader was not only not afraid of fire, but also enjoyed it. He seemed cool to them. When the flame went out, the main character raised his hand up and summed up that there were no injuries on his hand. Since Mia was a player, she thought that the main character had reduced the damage because he is a player, but she didn't know that for this world he is real. Then she decided to be the second. She also put out her hand in a pretentious way and said that she was ready to endure any pain for the sake of joining the Vulcan gang. Since the bandit with the flamethrower was no longer going to be surprised by anything, he asked her to cope with this ordeal, since her friend coped well. But when the flame touched her hand, she began to beat feverishly on the floor, writhing in pain and saying that she was going to burn. This incessant whining hooked even the volcano itself, and whatever it was, he ordered it to be extinguished and the next one to start. When Mia returned to everyone, she decided to ask if she played her role normally because she tried very hard. But the faces of these two were not the least bit happy. The main character thought that she overdid it, and Rex thought that they both overplayed. Since it was Rex's turn now, he came out to the table and stretched out his right hand. He was ready for what was about to happen. The bandit, who had a flamethrower in his hands, had already begun to doubt that there were normal people in this trio in principle. Then he lowered the flamethrower and pulled the trigger a third time. The flames quickly engulfed Rex's hand, but he was ready for it. One of the conditions was not to show pain, so Rex stood silently and did not shout anything. For him it was like torture, where he could not crack. The boss of the Vulcan gang appreciated this act, and reported that now these 3 have officially become members of the Vulcan gang. When Rex approached his comrades, he was praised for his very lively acting performance because even the main character was hurt by such a spectacle. But as it turned out of all 3 of them, he was the only one who did not turn off the pain in any way and endured it all for real. Suddenly, a man who had already lived approached the young people and said that he was a mentor for beginners and he had a task, by completing which they would be able to contribute to the development of the gang. The main character assumed that everything would go according to this scenario, so he thought it was a great idea to accept this task in order to strengthen himself in the gang. After the words of the mentor, Mia, without waiting for a long time, put glasses on her eyes and was already holding a sword in her hands, fully ready for the upcoming mission. The main character began to think that she was very windy, and someday it would turn sideways for them. Since the newcomers agreed, the old man said that they would have to intercept a truck sent from the central settlement, because there are a lot of things important for the volcano inside. The main character perfectly understood the scale of this operation, and it seemed to him that 3 people were not enough to rob such a serious goal. The old man pointed out behind him that the elite of their camp would go along with the newcomers, and he also mentioned that the cargo was very important, and they should not lose it in any case. The main character nodded affirmatively and promised that they would not let their leader and mentor down, because they have no right to make mistakes. Now the 3 newcomers were standing as full-fledged gang members. Mia couldn't believe that everything had turned out so simply. The main character said that there was nothing to fear now because it was just a game, and they would be able to take action, but Rex was not sure about such simplicity. Suddenly, a bottle fell out of the pocket of the main character and clattered loudly on the floor. It turned out to be strong and did not break after the fall. This attracted Mia's attention. She decided to pick up this bottle to examine. She could not understand what it was. The main character was struck like lightning because he could not imagine that there would be such a setup from the bottle. He was simply speechless, and he could not answer Mia's question. She, in turn, remembered that she had seen this substance when Ron was taking a bath, because he rubbed it into his body. This information finished off the main character because it turned out that she was spying on him, and it was not for nothing that a chill ran down his back when he washed. Rex also confirmed this. She realized that she had stirred up too much and hastened to justify that she was not spying on anyone, but was just passing by. The main character took the jar and said it was sunscreen, but the girl did not believe it and decided that he took her for a fool. But in order for her to get behind him, the main character said that this thing increases attributes, and it worked. Only she wanted to get smeared too. The guy pressed the jar to his chest, showing with all his appearance that it was very valuable to him, and said that it was expensive. It was a fire-resistant cream. Because the main character could not reduce the level of pain as players, he had to improvise. A group of guys approached the newcomers. One of them congratulated the first on joining and introduced himself, saying that his group had joined a little earlier. The main character realized that in order not to reveal their intentions, they need to win back the gang members, and he asked the guy if he would advise anything. In response, the guy grabbed Ron by the hand and began to sincerely admire how the main character passed the test of the volcano, because not many people are capable of this. In order not to offend such a fanatical character, the main character decided to say that everything he does is for the glory of the volcano. The guy only admired more, and said that the mentor had already told everything about the task and the cars were ready, so do not delay. After a while, 3 cars drove into the wasteland, one of which was the main character with his team. The departing cars were watched by the head of Vulcan's gang and mentor. Vulcan was almost sure that the newcomers were spies from the fight. The mentor also said that he assumed this, so in their first task he sent them to attack the Drac caravan. Vulcan squeezed his hand and a flame lit up in his fist. He promised himself that if they betrayed his gang, he would torture them with fire until death. A few hours later, the group sent on a mission arrived at the transshipment point. According to the information, it was the right place. All the members of the group were sitting at the table, and they were served a signature dish, which was ordered by an older friend. It was noodles with bull's eyes. He sat and beamed with joy, also called this dish the pinnacle of cooking, and wanted the newcomers to try it too. But they, who had seen such culinary delights for the first time, decided that let him eat it first, and then they would, if the appetite came. The foreman used this dish for 2 cheeks and said that the pass is a checkpoint through which all caravans go, and their goal should soon arrive. The main character decided to assess the situation and said that the caravan would surely be guarded, and if a shootout started, they would lose the advantage. The foreman reacted easily to this. He smiled and put his chopsticks on the table. He said that he had already ordered the road to be mined, and this would help them attack suddenly. Rex held one of these mines in his hands and examined it. Then he began to name its characteristics and was able to name every single one. This surprised the elder very much because there were few such experts, and he decided that Rex would help him calm the blockheads of their settlement. At that moment, an armored car began to slowly enter the territory of the transshipment point, and people began to run away in panic. It was a long-awaited caravan. The main character and Rex watched this car and were surprised how strong it was, because it could complicate their task. While they were watching this, a boy ran out onto the road, whose ball popped out. He did not pay attention to the approaching transport. The boy's mother was horrified when she saw where her son was, but she was too far away and could not help him. Picking up his ball, the boy finally noticed the car, but it was too late, and he could not move from his place, but only helplessly called his mother. At the last moment, he was saved by Mia, who jumped from a running start, which allowed him to quickly overcome the necessary distance. The transport began to slow down and turned into a place where there was a stall in which the main character and Rex were. Because when the car drove up to this stall, it caught him a little. The owner almost started a tantrum because that's all he had. Several people got out of the car. A fit man stood in the center. He asked whose child it was because he could have stained the car with his blood. But Mia started yelling at him from the side and pointing out his mistakes in driving and that it was very dangerous. This man introduced himself as a Hob and said that he obeys the fight, and in this territory he sets the rules himself, and he doesn't care about a few insignificant lives. Mia was thoroughly exasperated by this, and she began to get very angry. She began to insult this fool, because he annoyed her a lot. Hob, without thinking twice, took out a gun and said since she was so brave, let her talk to the bullet in his gun. He began to think what to shoot her. At this time, the main character came up to Mia and hugged her. He said that this was his girlfriend, and she was a little weak in mind, and as an apology, he would cover the food costs. Mia was both angry and blushed at the same time because she was called a girl, but the main character asked her to calm down and not aggravate the situation. Hob put the gun away and said that he was in a good mood today, so he would forgive this trick. He was also pleased with the idea of free food. When these people went towards the stall, Rex approached the main character, and the main character asked him if everything was ready, to which he received an affirmative answer. Hob picked up a mug of beer and made a toast, in which he wished everyone satiety and hoped that Drac would praise him for a good trade. The main character watched this meal and enjoyed it, because his plan was already in motion, which means everything will be fine soon. Suddenly, someone's heavy hand fell on his shoulder, from which he jerked a little because he was in his thoughts. Turning around, he saw that it was a Hob, and making a contented face, asked if everything was fine with him. Hob said that everything was fine, but the main character was frail and could not stand up for his girlfriend, and he advised him not to leave the house so as not to lose face. The main character continued to smile and did not show that he was much stronger than this upstart and could kill him in a second. Well, everything will be soon. Hob laughed and told his people to get in their cars. It was time for them to go on. A few minutes passed and the caravan drove away from the transshipment point, only letting out wisps of smoke from the muffler. The main character took a walkie-talkie and said that the target had left the transshipment point and would be there in a few minutes, so you need to be ready. The car was driving calmly through a deserted area, and the people inside had no idea what would happen in a few minutes. Suddenly, the driver turned pale in the face and told his commander that he was starting to have problems with his stomach. This angered the commander, and he said that no one forced him to eat so much, and if he spoils the air right in the car, he will be shot. And, as planned, the car ran over a mine with its front wheel. It was obvious what would happen next. There was a very strong explosion, the epicenter of which was right under the car. The car was thrown up by a powerful wave. This force was enough for such a heavy armored vehicle to roll over on its side and could no longer continue moving. Hob opened the side door and started to get out of the car. He was a little battered, but he was not injured. He was interested in who attacked them. The main character, Mia, and Rex came out of the smoke left by the explosion. The guy asked Hob if he had forgotten him, because little time had passed. There were many more people behind the backs of these three, and they all obviously decided to attack the caravan. The main character told Hob another trigger phrase. Once they had eaten, it was time to go, because these were his words. When the leader of the caravan realized who attacked him, he began, like everyone like him, to flaunt his power and threaten his leader. But the main character interrupted Hob and told him that his leader was a cheeky Drac. thereby showing that he was not afraid and offered to give the goods in exchange for life. But the Hob twisted his face into an evil grimace and explained that since they had the courage to rob them, did they know what kind of goods they were? The main character said without hesitation that it could not be anything other than supplies or luxuries, or maybe cigarettes. Hob jumped off the car. He had a rifle in his hands. He ordered his men to prepare for battle as the situation was heating up. A lot of people got out of the car who had excellent ammunition and no less good weapons. This confused the senior. He did not understand where the guards had so many weapons. At least there was no information about such weapons. But when they attacked them, everything immediately became clear, because the goods they were transporting turned out to be weapons, and there were plenty of them. The main character knew what it could mean. He said that it was direct smuggling and was a serious crime, even in this world. But of course, the people who transport weapons know what they are doing, so Hob opened fire and ordered the others to attack too. Everyone from the volcano group was covered by heavy fire, and the main character covered himself and hurried to hide behind something. He was able to find the stone and hide behind it, but he saw that the elder was not in a hurry to take cover and told him to hurry up. But the elder did not hear him anymore. He began to pour himself with a flammable liquid and shouted to his brothers that this was their test, and it was time to prove their faith. And picking up his enthusiasm, the others also began to pour this liquid over themselves, while praising the leader of the volcano. When the liquid soaked into the clothes, the elder set himself on fire and was immediately engulfed in a large flame, and he endured this pain. The others followed his example in exactly the same order, and soon the burning people began to rapidly approach the enemies. Hob grabbed a more powerful weapon, and he was scared of what was happening, but soberly ordered the destruction of these psychos. They opened fire on them, but the elder ordered his brothers to endure the pain and not noticing anything to get to the target. In the end, their target was the soldiers who guarded the caravan. When they got close to them, they grabbed them in their fiery embrace. Hob realized that their affairs were bad and started shooting in their direction himself, scolding his comrades for not being able to stand up for themselves. But at some point, his stomach suddenly twisted, and he realized that this was not just a reaction of the body. The main character realized that his idea had worked and decided that it was now possible to proceed with the execution of the plan. First of all, he applied the skill of changing muscles and lifted a boulder above him, behind which he had recently been hiding from heavy fire. Aiming a little, the main character threw a stone at a nearby guard, which was to be expected. It was an instant death. Hob fell to his knees, clutching his stomach. Now it dawned on him that Ron had poisoned the food, and he said it was a mean act. But the main character said that no one forced him to eat, and in principle they are at war, and in such a situation any methods are good. After seeing the main character's sword, Hob was already anticipating his victory. He took out a gun and said that it was more important that the sword or pistol was faster. But the main character said that the gun is faster only within 7 steps. After these words, he threw the sword towards the Hob. Of course, he could not have expected this, and the sword absolutely hit him in the hand and knocked out the pistol that he boasted so much about. And, as the main character intended, the gun flew straight into his hand, and now he said that this is the limit of 7 steps. The next moment, a large through hole formed in Hob's head, which was made by a bullet from his own pistol. The main character blew away the smoke coming out of the muzzle and said that firearms differ from cold weapons only in that they are more accurate and faster. Meanwhile, the battle ended and embers remained from the enemies. It was a clean victory in principle for Ron's squad, even without losses. Rex reported that all the members of Vulcan's gang were killed, but apparently they were originally victims. Now they needed to deliver weapons to Vulcan. Mia had already managed to collect some of the weapons, and she didn't really like the idea of giving away so many good weapons. The main character thought about it, because it turned out that Mia was finally right, and it would be wrong to give up the weapon, since their goal was to destroy the Vulcan gang. Then Rex said that there was only one way to get a weapon and not arouse suspicion from the Vulcan gang. The main character agreed to such a move because it really was the only way. Rex took out a gun and said he was ready. Mia stood all this time between these two and sincerely did not understand what they were talking about and what kind of method it was. Then Rex put his gun to his temples and said that in the future everything falls on their shoulders. In the end, he pulled the trigger, which only convinced the main character of his usefulness and scared Mia very much. After a while, they were able to deliver the bodies of all the members of the Vulcan gang to the base. Among these bodies was the body of Rex. The main character stood in front of the gang leader. He skillfully pretended and said that the enemy had strong firepower, and all the gang members died in battle. Vulcan approached the main character and put his hand on his shoulder. He said that they had passed the test and were now being appointed as the main part of Vulcan's gang. The main character bowed as a sign of respect. Again, his cover required this, since it was too early to reveal himself. He smiled maliciously and rejoiced that everything had gone perfectly, and now there was only a small part of the plan left. At this time, not far from the vicinity of the camp, Erica decided to play a shooting range with zombies, and in principle, such weak monsters could allow this. She was angry that she didn't know where Ron had gone, so she decided to take out her anger on the monsters. Everything would be fine, but a huge zombie appeared behind her, and without even turning around, she realized that it was someone strong. Realizing that this was a second-level zombie, she decided to fight back and turned around to start shooting back. But as expected, the monster did not wait for her actions and attacked first, hitting her with his hand, from which she flew far to the side. Falling on her back, she cursed herself again for her helplessness, but did not give up hope that she would be able to recover. Suddenly, a girl appeared above the head of this giant who had a huge axe. Like the enemies, she was going to kill this big guy. It was Linda. She, as planned, hit this zombie on the head with an axe, from which he fell dead. The girl stood in front of Erica in a victorious stance, and she did not understand who this girl was because she saw her for the first time. But Linda smiled in greeting and introduced herself, saying that she was a player, and she also extended a helping hand to Erica. After such a victory, the girls decided that it would be nice to refresh themselves in the water, because after the fight they got pretty dirty. Linda was surprised at how realistic the taste in this game is, and Erica decided to show her that not only the taste is real, but also the touch. But while they were having so much fun, Linda's bra rope was untied, and he was swept into the water, and something had to be done. Linda reacted with lightning speed and immediately dived into the water for the bra, because it was important to her. As a result, after a few seconds, she surfaced naked with a bra in her hands and happily shouted to Erica that she had caught him. However, she did not notice that she had already swum a considerable distance and turned out to be a little different from where she was. There was a guy standing in front of her who saw her in all her glory. Realizing what kind of situation she was in, she covered her chest with her hands and shouted loudly that this guy was a pervert, because he did not take his eyes off her. The guy began to panic, no less, and began waving his arms, claiming that his name was Ron. The girl knew this name, but the guy did not look like its owner. Then the main character applied the transformation and regained his real appearance. This was to convince the girl of his words. Seeing her friend in front of her, the girl calmed down and believed that it was him. The guy did not expect that Linda would play such a game. And everything seemed to be going well. They reconciled and began a quiet conversation as Erica crept up from behind and knocked out the main character by hitting him on the head. After a while, the guy began to recover. The blow was quite strong and his head still hurt. 2 girls were sitting in front of his eyes. When his mind began to return, he decided to find out what had happened, because he had just seen his grandmother, who was calling him to the other side of the bridge. Erica was sitting next to her, who had long ago realized what she had done and peacefully asked for forgiveness, because she simply confused Ron with a pervert. But the main character has finally regained his common sense and blurted out that if he were a pervert, he would never climb Erica. As expected, this made her very angry, and as usual, she began to strangle her master without fear of consequences. Once this little misunderstanding was sorted out, the main character said that it was time to return to the camp and make an important announcement. A lot of people had already gathered in the shelter, and everyone was waiting for the head. None of them knew what was going to happen and what was going to be discussed. The main character came on stage and hung up a map. He also thanked the activists, with the help of which they had a map of the volcano's territory and their defense. He also pointed to a row of weapons behind his back, which was more than enough, saying that they bought it at a limited price. And then Phil put in his 5 kopecks, because even he understood that there were fewer players in the shelter than the volcano, and without a plan they had no chance. But the main character said that on this occasion, he gives each participant of the capture 3 attempts at resurrection. He also explained that killing an ordinary Vulcan member gives 100 points, the leader 500 points, and the boss as many as 1,000 points, which was a very generous event. The players who heard such gifts for the event immediately agreed to such conditions and were ready to register. Linda came up to Ron. She also wanted to register for this event. It was obvious that she was interested in it. Despite her zeal, the main character warned her that it was very dangerous and let her not feel pain, but crawling on the remaining limbs is not always pleasant. Then the girl suddenly hugged the guy and said that he would not underestimate her because her gaming skills were good. It impressed him so much that he no longer argued. Again, she promised the main character not to tell anyone that he was pretending to be another player. When the registration was over and all the players were ready to go on the attack, the main character raised his gun in the air and fired, thereby giving the start to this event. The players were already armed to the teeth. They were just waiting for the moment when they could finally attack the Vulcan gang. The next day, the head of the volcano decided to reward 2 talented newcomers and offered them gold as payment for their achievements. They accepted such a generous gift without hesitation. Since the plan was still in force, there is no extra gold. At that moment, a man ran into the hall. It was one of the gang members. He pointed to the exit and said that a lot of people were approaching their base, definitely for the soul of the volcano. Then the mentor calmly said that there were a lot of booby traps around the base, and they would definitely fall into them, so there was nothing to worry about. But the scout did not think to calm down. He said that all these people had already passed the minefields and there was not a single loss among them. This news greatly surprised the mentor, but he immediately realized that since everything turned out that way, there are traitors among the gang members. And since all the weirdness started with the arrival of the new ones, they were the ones who betrayed the gang, and he pointed his finger at them. Mia laughed and deliberately drew all the attention to herself and asked the mentor that he was really so stupid that he only noticed this. She made an evil face and confirmed that she was a traitor and now there was no point in hiding. She pointedly pointed at the leader of the Vulcan gang with her finger and called on him to rest in all his deeds. In the end, she took out a weapon and shot at the volcano. He was still sitting on the throne and did nothing. But the main character jumped in front of him and caught a bullet with his body. He pathetically said that he would protect the head. And at the moment when he hadn't landed yet, he pulled out a gun and fired back right at Mia. The bullet hit the girl in the chest, and she, already half dead, began to fall to the floor, of course. This whole scene was part of the plan. She fell to the floor and started shouting at the main character that if he helps the enemy, then he himself does not go far from him. After that, she rolled over on her stomach and began to bleed something, saying that her comrades would not forget this and would come. The main character came up to her and stood naked on her and pulled the trigger a few more times. Of course, he could not have done it. She would have died anyway, but she was causing too much drama, which was unnecessary. When she finally fell silent, the main character turned to the head and said that it was his fault, and he did not keep track of this girl. So to atone for his guilt, he wanted to go into battle. But the head put his hand on his shoulder and said that the guy had already shown himself very well, because he had protected him regardless of his safety, so the volcano offered him to rest and heal his wounds. Several people appeared from the back of the hall. They carried a huge hammer wielded by Vulcan. The head took it in his hands, and the hammer began to burn with flames. Obviously, it was not a simple weapon. Vulcan ordered his men to move out and fight an imposter. The mentor warned the head that it could be dangerous and there were still traitors, to which he got angry and grabbed him by the collar. Vulcan said that the mentor did not understand anything and was behaving like an ungrateful coward, and with these words, he threw him aside. But when Vulcan left, the mentor said that people like him usually die first, and after the battle they will see who was right. The main character sat across from him and told him that he would die anyway, regardless of the outcome of the battle. The mentor did not understand why he would die, because he had done nothing wrong, and he wanted the main character to explain his words. The guy explained that the volcano would kill him anyway, because if he loses, It turns out the mentor was right, and if he wins, then the mentor lied to him. These words made sense because Vulcan was a cruel man, so the mentor did not know what to do and asked for advice. The main character put his hand on him and offered to rob Vulcan and divide everything equally, and then go home. Two groups of people were standing opposite each other. A big battle was about to begin, and they were waiting for orders. Vulcan said that these people were too few to defeat Vulcan's gang, and offered his fighters 3 crystals for each killed. And after his words, a massacre began. A large bunch of people started killing each other. Everything was involved there, cold weapons and firearms. Linda also participated in this battle and easily killed the enemies one by one. She still didn't understand how this game could be so real because she had killed and seen the insides of her enemies. Suddenly, a sword pierced her chest. One bandit hid behind her and attacked her from behind, and this attack worked, which he was glad because the girl was strong. But when she was supposed to die, something went wrong and the bandit did not immediately understand what was happening, because this usually did not happen. The girl was enveloped by a greenish tint of light and she began to recover. The bandits did not understand how this was possible. Linda revived and was ready to kill enemies again. The bandits began to realize that they were not dealing with ordinary people. For some reason, they were resurrected. Then the bandits noticed Rex, who very quickly made bags of meat out of enemies, and it was noticeable that he was a pro in his business. Mia was also there. She was shooting at bandits with great passion and felt some kind of pleasure from it. For the bandits, these two were a shock, because they personally saw that they were dead, and now they are alive and fighting against them. Chaos began on the battlefield, and the head of the Vulcan gang himself stepped on the stage, because he was tired of looking at it, and he violently hit the ground with a hammer. The main character and the mentor were standing in front of the safe, the doors of which were really big. The mentor said that he did not have a key. But the main character said that he had his own key, and the mentor did not understand what kind of key it was, because there was a combination lock in the safe. Then the main character decided to show his key. He called it C4 and took it out of his pocket. It was a weighty argument against any door. He installed explosives on the door, and they moved away a little so that they would not be touched by the explosion, because the thing was powerful. When the distance became safe, the main character pressed the button and a strong directional explosion was heard. The door could not withstand this. Indeed, the door could not withstand such an attack, and it was torn apart, but the main character did not find anything inside. This made him very angry, and he grabbed the mentor because he claimed that all the treasures of the volcano were here, but it was empty. Then the mentor said that he had once heard Vulcan say that he had hidden his gold in a very safe place, and no one would find it. After hearing this, the main character decided to spread his brains and guess where to hide the gold, and even unnoticed, and he had an idea. They returned to the throne room, and the main character approached the throne of Vulcan with a knife. The mentor did not understand why until the last. The main character told him that Vulcan had been hiding his gold all this time in the most visible place, and began to remove the covering from the throne. At the end of such cleaning, it turned out that the throne, which had been standing in the hall for a long time, was completely golden. This decision can be called ingenious. As soon as the gold was discovered, the mentor took out a gun and said that there was certainly enough gold, but not for 2. But before he could do anything, a shot rang out and dozens of bullets ripped open his stomach. He was already half dead and did not understand how it happened, because he had thought everything out well and chose a seemingly good moment. Only he did not take into account the fact that the main character had originally planned this. He stood with a shotgun and said that the mentor took out the gun too early. Meanwhile, the battlefield was full of hell. All the members of the Vulcan gang were dead, and their bodies lay chaotically on the ground. Vulcan personally started the battle, and this greatly complicated the battle. One of the players attacked him again. Only it was all useless, and Vulcan was able to intercept him with his huge hammer and nailed him to the ground. Mia and Rex stood in complete incomprehension. Many players had no lives left, and they could not resurrect, and they themselves had the last lives left. This was unfortunate because after so much effort, they had to admit defeat and retreat. Vulcan stood and praised his strength because in fact ordinary people could not oppose anything to the awakened one. And at that moment, the mentor's head appeared in front of Vulcan's feet. At first he did not understand what it was. The main character said that the mentor wanted to betray everyone, so he had to kill him. He was sitting on the golden throne, and after Vulcan understood everything, he said that since the mentor was already dead, the next one would be Vulcan himself. All this seriously angered the bandit, and he began to burn all over because not only was he betrayed, but they also encroached on his gold. The main character got up from the throne and took out his sword. He did not consider himself a traitor because he was a secret agent, and these are different things. He decided to show Vulcan his new technique, and his sword began to pass an electric wave through itself. The main character ran away and soared into the air swinging his sword, from which the lightning was already diverging to the side, and the blow should have turned out strong. Vulcan reacted to the blow and intercepted the main character's sword with his hammer, and the two powerful weapons touched. That's just the volcano did not calculate that his hammer is metal and passes electricity well, so the whole charge went to him. Because of such a strong discharge, the mask that Vulcan never took off fell from his head to the ground. And now the enemy was standing face to face with the main character, and it was obvious that his face did not look like an ordinary person. And it was true because instead of a head, this man had a flame that resembled facial features, and whether he was human. He considered himself not a human being because people were a lower form of life for him. He was awakened, and this is a completely different level. After some time, his armor began to crack and fly away from his body, and flames also raged under it. Vulcan had completely freed himself from his metal armor and now stood absolutely without anything, about, and was the flame itself. With one light movement, he surrounded the players with a fiery wind, which immediately made them hot, but this was only the beginning. After a few seconds, this fiery wind turned into a hurricane, and now people were burning alive because of the incredible temperature. The main character realized that this man was also awakened, and his ability to command the flame, this greatly complicated the task. Vulcan confirmed the words of the main character and agreed that he was awakened, and he considered himself the most successful project. And once all the information was said, he attacked the main character with a flame. It was definitely stronger than a flamethrower. Mia was very worried, because even she understood that no one, even this strong guy, would survive such a direct attack. But Rex reassured her, because the main character is not so easy to kill. The flame completely engulfed the main character, and it seemed that he had no chance of survival, but Vulcan said that his flame was invincible, and if it disappeared, everything would disappear. But within a few seconds, the main character emerged from the flames unharmed. He even joked that the flame of the volcano is not stronger than his grandmother. Of course, the secret of his safety was in the refractory oil. Before the fight, he applied it to the body, and apparently it was not in vain, because without it, he would have burned without a trace. This surprised Vulcan, but he was not going to stop and said that it was just a warm-up and now there will be a real flame. In the direction of the main character, the flame was directed, which in its shape resembled something similar to a dragon with two heads. Since the guy was not going to take such a blow on himself, he took out his sword and decided to use it to repel the attack. At the moment when the flames almost reached him, he used a sword technique and cut the flame dragon into several pieces, which completely neutralized the flames. Now there was a good opportunity to counterattack Vulcan, and he decided to use a quick attack to end the battle. And since Vulcan did not expect this, the attack was successful, and the guy cut the bandit's body in half, which was supposed to end the duel. However, the volcano stood unharmed, and it was clear that this attack did not cause him any damage. He said that it was strong, but unfortunately, he had long merged with the elements and would not die so easily now. The next moment, he hit the main character in the face, and this blow was very powerful because the guy was thrown a decent distance away. He crashed into the golden throne and blood spurted out of his mouth. For the first time in a long time, he felt pain, which meant that this awakened one was very strong. After the main character was on the throne, Vulcan used one of his techniques called the Fiery Kingdom of the Dead. After his words, the golden throne that Ron was on began to quickly heat up and melt, changing its shape. Now the main character could not move because the throne became his fetters and completely enveloped the limbs of the guy. Vulcan also said that since he could not burn the main character, he would simply immobilize him so that he would not escape. But the main character was absolutely ready for this turn of events. because gold could not hold him back for a long time. Since he owned the system, he opened an exchange and began the process of exchanging the entire golden throne for glasses, from which the throne began to glow. The next moment, this golden structure began to change and smoothly rise up, disappearing, and the main character received 1,000 points many times. Seeing this, Vulcan fell to his knees and began to ask not to touch his gold, because it was very valuable to him, and when it was over, he demanded to return it back. But the main character was not going to do this, especially after a small fight. He realized how to defeat this fiery man. Since he now had a lot of points, he could afford to buy the highest level of possession of the ice stage, which cost 5,000 points. Vulcan went into a rage after such an act of the main character and swore that even if he spent all his life force, he would burn the guy to the ground. At that moment, more and more scorching flames began to emanate from his body, and a two-headed fire dragon appeared above him. The main character also decided to use his new skill and asked Vulcan if he could really defeat him. A huge ice dragon appeared in front of the fiery two-headed dragon. It was obvious that the fire would give way to cold this time. As expected, the ice dragon quickly destroyed the fiery one, and now he was alone with the volcano. The bandit himself did not understand how it happened, because just a few minutes ago he had a complete advantage, and now he lost. And after realizing his helplessness, the volcano accepted his defeat. The ice monster crashed into him with all his strength. Now, in place of the once formidable bandit, there was only a frozen statue. He clung to life to the last, even if he accepted defeat. It seemed that this did not mean the end yet, and at some point the ice would crack and the flame would flare up again, but the ice cracked and the ice statue began to crumble. In the end, it was a victory, and the players were very happy that this fight was finally over. They praised the main character. He was completely devastated, and it was clear that he was very ill and very tired. As a result, he stood there for a few more seconds, after which he began to fall and lose consciousness, because this battle was really difficult. 2 days had already passed since that operation, and the main character was lying on the bed. He still hadn't recovered, which was strange, since he hadn't received any damage in that battle. Linda and Mia were standing in front of his bed, and the girls didn't understand why he hadn't woken up yet, since a lot of time had already passed. Mia came up with a very interesting idea, and she decided to try it. Linda didn't know what she was up to, but she was interested. Mia took out a knife and offered to kill the main character and wait for him to resurrect, but she did not know that this would be the end for him. Linda did not support this idea. The very thought that they would hurt the person she loves was inconvenient. She ran up to Mia and hugged her, asking her not to do anything like that because it was impossible. But Mia quickly forgot what she wanted to do and now compared her breasts with Linda's. It seemed to her that her friend had more. As a result, she decided to check it out and suggested that Linda undress in order to make sure of it. At that moment, the main character opened his eyes. When he got out of bed, he saw Linda with her breasts half open and Mia who was trying to undress her. The situation was as incomprehensible as possible and even more awkward, so he couldn't think of anything better than to say good morning. After a while, the main character came to the main room, where Chloe told that the Vulcan gang had been completely destroyed, and now all her lands belonged to them. She was also interested in what happened to the guy's face. He replied that it was nothing serious, but it was clear for what he received. He asked if they had sent, "Are they going to the central settlement?" Chloe said that she had temporarily suppressed the spread of information about their victory, and it was right, since it was necessary to recycle the arsenal of the Vulcan gang before Drac decided to raise an uprising. She also said that 2 adventurers, or players, had disappeared in recent days, and they still hadn't been found, but it wasn't something serious. At this time, several bound people were sitting in a spacious room. Torches were burning around them instead of light. It was those missing adventurers, Phil and Tim. Someone started coming into the room, and they started asking to let them go. In front of them stood a very beautiful girl in a revealing outfit. She was surprised that these people were able to defeat the Vulcan gang. Seeing such a beautiful girl, the guys immediately started drooling. They thought that this was a new non-player character, something like a sexy villain. The girl took out the whip and introduced herself as Elsa. She also said that she was a member of the final evolution, and it was better for the guys to tell her everything they know, otherwise it would hurt them. After these words, She swung the whip and hit the guys in the face, and it turned out so well that it hurt two at once. After that, she put her foot on Phil's crotch and asked them what they felt when they were hurt. But she could not expect that these guys would be happy with such a girl, and even more so to ask her to beat them. For them, it was a cool opportunity to be in the attention of a lovely girl. The girl did not understand how this was possible, because everyone she beat with her whip experienced unbearable pain, and these two asked to beat them again. But the guys explained to her the reason for such fearless behavior. They told her that these are not real bodies, and therefore they feel pain in a different way. But unfortunately for them, Elsa turned out to be quite smart and quickly realized that their consciousness was in these shells, and this explained their endurance. The next moment, electricity went out of her hands, and the guys began to feel not very well, and Phil had a bad feeling about it. Meanwhile, the electricity that the girl was letting out of her hands only intensified and began to come out. At the end of this procedure, the guys lost consciousness, and the girl was happy because now, with their help, she'll sneak into the shelter. Meanwhile, the shelter was flourishing. There were noticeably more players, and two girls were walking around the territory. They were very good-looking girls. They also came up with the idea to look for beautiful guys while they were walking. Phil and Tim came out to meet them, but at first glance it was clear that something had happened to them, and now they were behaving strangely. The girl, who did not understand this behavior, thought that they were approaching them and approached Phil, after which she hit him. After that, Phil showed his teeth, which no longer looked like human teeth, and attacked the girl, biting her neck. She desperately tried to fend off the attacker, but it was clear that she was inferior in pure physical strength. The second girl did not hesitate and wasted no time starting to run away from there, while Tim rushed after her in pursuit. At this time, the main character was calculating his finances. After converting the Golden Throne into points, he received more than 100,000 points, and he could not get enough of it. Erica suddenly ran into the room. She was worried about something. Her first words were that something bad was happening on the street. In the end, she was able to squeeze out the main thing that the adventurers, as she called the players, turned into zombies. This news shocked Ron. He decided to go outside and see for himself what was happening. And yes, there was complete chaos outside. The players were attacking each other and biting. Mia was running towards the main character at that time, and it was clear from her that she had lost the rudiments of reason. The main character grabbed her by the shoulders and pressed her against the wall, not understanding how this is possible. Is it possible to infect a player with a zombie virus? A system notification came out, which explained that this virus only touches the brain and does not touch the body. Eventually, all players will die for real, and according to their condition, it was inevitable. In all corners of the real world, players began to go crazy. While they remained in the game, relatives and friends did not understand what was happening. Some of the players simply lost consciousness and started foaming at the mouth, as if they were poisoned or it was like epilepsy. The main character fell into despair. For the first time in a long time, he did not know what to do. The system escalated the situation, claiming that they would all die. Then the main character decided to ask her if they could be saved somehow. The system confirmed that it was possible, but for this it would have to transfer the bodies of the players to this world. The main character stood in front of the system screen and understood that only he was responsible for all this, and only he could save them. In order to transfer players to this world, the system set the price at 12,000 points and did not recommend performing such a task, but the guy could not listen to her. Ultimately, it was all his fault, and now he was obliged to save all these people, so he confidently confirmed this operation. The system reproached him for the lack of logic, but the main character replied that this is the human essence. When the points were deducted from the account, the transfer process began. The bodies of players in the real world began to disintegrate into many parts and disappear. Doctors who had already managed to hospitalize patients were completely confused and understood that what was happening was beyond the scope of science. Mia, as usual, was lying in her room and was in the game. Her body also began to gradually disappear and be transferred to another world. The same applied to Rex. He was in his shelter and also got infected with the virus, so he underwent the same procedure. In the end, in a few minutes, only their belongings and glasses remained from the players, which allowed them to transfer their consciousness to another world. The same thing sounded on all the news. All the patients in a coma disappeared without leaving a trace. The system reported that everything was successful, and all the players were healed. The host's goal was achieved. But Ron understood that now the worst part remained. All the bodies of the players were lying in the center of the settlement. This was done so that when they came to their senses, they could immediately be talked to. A day later, they began to come to their senses. Some did not understand what had happened. Someone noticed that they felt pain, even though they turned off this function in the settings, and some remembered that they had become zombies. The main character came on stage and urged everyone to pay attention to him. He said that he would explain everything now, and the news would not be pleasant. The players did not understand what was going to be discussed now. Then the main character loudly and clearly said that all the players got into the game for real. Mia did not immediately understand what these words meant, because they were in the game before, which means the chapter is nonsense. Ron decided not to delay the explanation and said that now they will not be able to leave the game, and even more so, they will not be able to resurrect. The players, not believing in this, immediately began trying to exit the game, but such a button simply ceased to exist, from which the panic began to increase. One of the girls pulled out a gun and put it to her head, because for her it was all nonsense. She decided that if the character dies, then she will leave the game. Since it was absolutely wrong, the main character tried to stop her, and asked not to do it, because he understood that she would die. But the girl shot straight at the weight. It was an instant death and quite ridiculous because if she had believed. When she fell, her body remained in the same position and the players began to realize that it was no longer a shell, but a real corpse, and now they were all trapped. Without taking long to wait for the main character, the first stone flew, and it was clear why it was thrown. A whole pile of stones flew after one. People demanded to release them. They had the right to do so because it was he who let them in here, and all responsibility lay on him. Covering his face with his hands, he assured people that he understood that this was his responsibility and that he would find a way to bring them back to the real world. If not, he would die. Mia was the first to respond to his words. She raised her hand and said that she trusted him completely. She also urged the players to calm down, because if they continue to get angry, nothing will change. She also reminded them that they are players and must cope with this problem. Rex joined her. He supported Mia and added that instead of complaining, they should find a way to strengthen their bodies and become stronger. The noise began to subside slowly, and the players calmed down. It began to dawn on them that they had no other options, and as long as they were serious, everything should be fine. But a new question arose, which raised a new wave of panic. They appealed to the head of the shelter, how he could guarantee their safety while they were in the settlement. The main character explained that while they were unconscious, he had already considered this issue and prepared a defense. After these words, he asked someone to come to the defense of the settlement, and everyone waited with bated breath. Huge mutant zombies began to come out to the players from all sides. They were much bigger than ordinary zombies and seemed very strong. The people who were expecting protection were scared to death because these monsters didn't seem friendly. They started screaming in fright. But all these terrible monsters obediently bent one knee and stood in front of the main character. This was his demonstration of strength. As the panic finally subsided, he imagined these sturdy men. They were zombie guards, which he built from the remains of zombies and crystals. But it still seemed to the players that these zombies, although they looked formidable, still would not be able to protect them. Then the main character ordered the release of ordinary zombies in order to demonstrate the abilities of zombie guards. And at that moment, crowds of zombies fell out of the cages. There were enough of them to destroy all the players present. The players were thrown into a sweat again, because they understood that these were real zombies coming in their direction. At the same time, they did not understand why they were released. Zombie guards did not wait long, and as soon as ordinary zombies approached a dangerous distance, they began to inexorably hammer them into the ground. After the zombie guards finished cleaning the territory, they stood behind the main character, and he said that he promised to protect everyone, which means it will be so. In the end, it was enough, and all the players went about their business. A beautiful moonlit night came to the camp. Mia was sitting on the roof of one of the buildings and drinking, thinking about everything that had happened today. The main character came up to her and was surprised to see her here. He said that she looks quite optimistic since she drinks at such a time. The girl smiled pleasantly and said that she had nothing else to do, because tears do not solve problems. It remains only to go forward. The main character was grateful to this girl and informed her about it. He also promised that when she returned to the real world, he would treat her to a drink. The girl just smiled and said that in order to drink, you don't need to wait for something, because they can drink right here and now, and all the worries will already wait. The two young men didn't seem to know what had happened today. They were sitting on the roof and having fun drinking, as if this evening could be the last. Since the night turned out to be stormy, the main character slept soundly in the morning and could not wake up as early as always. There was a knock on the door. It was Erica. She came to the main character with the news, but since he did not open the door, she decided to go in herself. From such knocks, the main character managed to wake up and was already starting to get ready when suddenly the door opened and Erica walked into the room. And then she regretted her decision because she saw the main character in what her mother gave birth to, and it made her blush. The main character explained that he likes to sleep naked and there's nothing wrong with that. He also asked what happened that she was so eager to get to him. The girl turned away so as not to embarrass herself even more and said that Drac had come to discuss the division of rewards for the destruction of the Vulcan gang. But since these were only the conditions of separation, the main character got dressed and decided to discuss some conditions too. All this time, Drac and his assistant sat quietly in the office and waited for the main character, since he was still asleep when they arrived. The bodyguard did not like the behavior of the head of the shelter very much, since they had been waiting for him for half an hour. Finally, the main character came and sat down opposite the fight. As expected, he was able to annoy the guests a little even after his arrival. The jokes of the main character already at the end began to anger the assistant of the fight, and she barely restrained herself so as not to start a brawl. Drac stopped his ward and began a very interesting conversation, in which he mentioned that their caravan had been attacked and whether Ron could know anything about it. The main character evasively said that the Vulcan gang did it, and whether it makes sense to come to him because of this, and now this gang is no more. Drac explained that he was here just for this reason. He mentioned that the main character decided to take the volcano gang plant for himself, and as it seemed to Drac, it was too much, and should have given this plant to the central settlement. This proposal angered Ron, and he, without restraining his tone, said that he, without sparing himself, tried and got this plant, and now the one who has nothing to do with it wants to take it for himself. Hearing this, Drac changed his hand, and instead there was a snake on the table, so he decided to put pressure on the main character to change his mind. But this trick did not scare the head a bit, and he said that one desire to get something is not enough. You need to offer something in return. This interested the fight, and he, remembering the last lucrative deal, smiled, but he could not know what the main character wanted until he himself said. Then the main character, without hesitation, pointed his finger at the girl and said that he wanted this bodyguard for himself, which greatly surprised her. After a short pause, the main character continued that if Drac agrees, he will think about giving the plant away. It seemed quite pointless for Drac, but he still decided to check with the main character if he was sure that he wanted to exchange the factory for a girl. His words went through the girl's devoted heart like a knife, and she decided to check with the owner. Did he really agree to this? Then Drac turned to her and calmly said that everything would be fine, and didn't she say herself that she would sacrifice herself for his well-being? This scene of love and indifference amused the main character enough, and he decided to interrupt their little quarrel and said that it was a joke and he didn't need anything. Drac got angry from such an attitude towards himself. No one dared to joke about him like that, and he said that he intended to resolve the issue today, so he brought someone with him. To this, the main character just smiled and pointed his finger towards the door, and then asked a question. Are we talking about these people by the hour? When they went outside, there was a bunch of mutilated fighters lying there. With all this, it was the elite army of the central settlement, and Drac was surprised. Hearing the words about the elite army, Ron pathetically said that he, by the way, was also their elite, and he also advised not to attack the shelter, since his army had lost. Having finished this, the main character hit the door with his fist, from which it shattered as if it had been loaded with buckshot. Drac realized that the main character was no longer going to cooperate, and now they were enemies, to which Ron said that in this world, everything is decided in a fight. The head of the central settlement did not take long to wait and quickly left, threatening finally that everything would be seen in trouble. The two got into their expensive car and drove away from the camp. Erica, who saw everything, was afraid that everything would be fine because it was still they who released the head of the central settlement alive. The main character understood that it was extremely unprofitable to kill a fight now, and he doubted that this arrogant would be an easy opponent. Arriving at the central settlement of fights together with his bodyguard, they immediately went to the laboratory. The assistant was here for the first time. Drac kindly explained to the girl that he had been making observations for some time and came to the conclusion that everyone has their own limit. He went to the big computer and started typing something on the buttons. He thought that the main character suspected something and therefore started a riot. After the text was typed, the Drac confirmed its effect, and a metal ball began to open at the bottom of the room. Green smoke escaped from it in a jet. And when the balloon opened completely, something similar to a zombie came out of it. But this instance was clearly different from the others. A squad of elite soldiers ran into the room with machine guns at the ready. They surrounded the monster and were going to attack it. As soon as all the soldiers were ready, the command to shoot was given, and a hail of bullets fell on the monster, from which he roared, but it was not a cry of pain, but rather anger. A moment later, the monster pushed off from the ground and flew straight at the soldier standing in front of him, huge, sharp scythes sticking out of the monster's hands. He brandished them as if he was mowing down a grain harvest. People could do nothing, and only flew apart from these attacks. In less than a few minutes, the entire squad was destroyed, and the monster stood in the center of the room and roared a victorious cry. It was a complete disaster for the bodyguard that one zombie was able to destroy an entire squad, and in such a short period of time. Drac stood and rejoiced at the end of this experiment because now he had such a strong monster, and his goal was to create an army of such creatures. He said all this while in a separate wing of the laboratory, in which there were many glass capsules, in which there were obviously the same creatures. He laughed like an evil genius, because now he will be able to take revenge on Ron, and when the army is ready, it is his shelter that will take the first blow. A week has passed since Drac's arrival in the settlement. The main character devoted himself to sword practice every day, and today was an hour of training. While he was engaged in training, he did not notice how people approached him, and one of them asked if he was the head of the shelter. In front of the main character was a group of people who asked to shelter them all in a shelter, because their house had turned into a resident of evil. Ron quickly realized that these were residents of the central settlement and asked to explain to him what had happened there, that they had come so far, and even to seek refuge. All these people were depressed. Many were crying even though they were men. One of them said that a massive infection with a zombie virus had begun in the central settlement. According to this man, a few days ago he was walking home with his friend after a good drink. They barely moved their legs. How suddenly a huge figure appeared behind them. Her body blocked the sun and plunged the friends into the shade. This man noticed this figure late. He heard the cry of his comrade and turned around at the sound, pouring cold sweat and immediately sobering up. In front of him stood a 3-meter zombie who was holding the body of his comrade in his hands without a head. He simply bit it off, as if it were an apple. When he finally realized what was happening, he rushed away from there with all his might. He shouted to the whole street, called for help, security. But the longer he ran, the more he realized that no one would save him, and such creatures are now all over the settlement. He was right. Many swarms of the city plunged into chaos and now looked more like hell. All buildings and equipment were covered in fire, and huge zombies walked the streets. After such hard memories, the man began to cry even more and grabbed his head with his hands. He and a few others managed to escape, but there were probably survivors there. The main character so far perceived this as a kind of test. He coolly asked where their army was, because in the central settlement it was not small, and they also had a leader of fights. One mention of this name brought this man out of himself. According to him, it was because of the fight that the virus appeared, because he was conducting experiments, and one test subject escaped and the massacre began. He also said that the head of the central settlement himself had closed himself in his castle and wanted to sneeze at ordinary people who came to him for help. After all that was said, This man fell to his knees and began to beg the main character for help because his wife and daughter were still in this hell. After him, all the other refugees began to kneel and ask to save their loved ones, acquaintances, second halves, because they all knew that the main character had defeated the leader of the volcano. The main character approached these people, crossed his arms, and began to say that he was far from a hero and certainly not a good person. But he opened his hands and said that despite this, there was no phrase in his dictionary, to leave to the mercy of fate, and he promised to kill the head of the central settlement. The next day, Ron organized a large meeting, during which he said that he planned to gather a team of volunteers to clean up the central settlement and rescue people. There was a small problem in all this. Former players were now afraid to go on dangerous tasks, because now they had no opportunity to resurrect, which means it was not worth the risk. The main character understood the reason for their fear, but they also had to understand that this concerns everyone, because if the central settlement falls, they will be next in line. Erica volunteered from the crowd even though she was scared, but she understood how terrible it was to lose dear people and did not want to see this. The main character was glad that she agreed, but she was not a player, and he did not understand why she would get into it. But this cute girl's explanation was as simple as she was. She just didn't want to sit back and wait for her death, but wanted to fight for life. For Erica, Mia and Linda agreed to this adventurous task, even if they were girls, but they had very unshakable ideals. Rex also responded to the call of the head of the settlement, who requested to double the reward, because now it could cost his life, and Nika also responded to this call. Seeing such a spirit, the other players decided not to give in, especially to non-player characters. They firmly decided that they would smash all the enemies. Seeing such a picture, the main character even shed tears, because he did not expect that all these people would agree to risk their lives to help him after what happened. Nika saw this and she was curious if the main character really cries because of such little things. After this friendly joke, he wiped his tears and asked if he was such a strong man, did not have the right to be soft. Shortly after the meeting, the group moved to the central settlement, the territory of which, by the way, was fenced with very high walls, which made it impossible to simply climb over them. But the main character clearly did not want to do this, and why when you have several huge zombies that could serve as a battering ram? The idea to open the gate, as in the good old days, was crowned with success. For such strong monsters, it was not difficult to open the gate in this way. When the gates were fully opened, the main character entered the territory of the main settlement together with his entire team. He was in anticipation of a new and grandiose battle. When they entered the territory of the settlement, a terrible sight opened up before them. The whole city was on fire. Crowds of infected people roamed the streets and finished off the survivors. A young and beautiful girl was cornered by one of the zombies and she had nowhere to run. She could only helplessly ask the monster not to approach her. But when the zombie was almost level with her, the instinct of self-preservation gave her a second wind, and she screamed with all her strength for help. And exactly at that moment, the zombie's head was pierced through by a bullet fired from a pistol. It was a real rescue at the last moment. Although the girl was saved, she was still scared and trembling. She did not understand what had happened, and even more so, who had saved her. Mia turned out to be the savior of this girl. She, smiling amiably, extended a helping hand to the trembling girl, and pleased her that they had come to save everyone. At this time, Linda and Erica fiercely fought with zombies, shredding them in whole packs. They took the brunt of the blow so that the rest would save the inhabitants. Phil and Tim, using the opportunity of free movement, rescued people who were already exhausted and most likely inhaled smoke, from which some lost consciousness. The door of the laboratory was very dense. It somewhat resembled the door of the volcano bunker, since it was just as massive. But, as it should be, once the bunker door was able to fall apart from the C4 charge, so this door was attacked in the same way, a strong explosion thundered. As a result, as the main character expected, the door could not stand, and after the explosion, a good hole was formed in its center. The main character assumed that since this door leads to the laboratory, then the zombies came from here, and since they came from here, then Drac is hiding somewhere here. Mia stood next to the main character, proudly straightening her shoulders. She said that she was the only one who could go with him, since the others were busy saving people. This time the main character was more attentive than usual, and said that it was better for her to return to the others, since no one knows what awaits them inside, and it is unlikely that he will be able to help her. But the girl already knew in advance that the main character would talk about it, and was not surprised. It didn't even offend her. Having accepted his decision, she asked him to come back alive, because he promised to bring all the players back, which means that the word must be kept. When he entered the laboratory, he did not see anyone. There was absolute devastation in the room, and all the flasks were broken, which made this place look even darker. Suddenly, a mutant similar to a girl appeared in front of the main character, and it was clear from her that she was dangerous because she was different from other zombies. She sharply waved her hand towards the head of the main character, but he was able to dodge this attack, although for this he had to show wonders of flexibility. After looking more closely at this creature, the main character caught himself thinking that he had already met this girl somewhere. And he was right. This zombie girl turned out to be Draka's bodyguard. The mutation didn't change her much, but it was almost impossible to recognize her right away, only by her clothes. She rushed at the main character again, intending to attack him, and this time she was more persistent than the previous one, so the guy had to get a sword. Covering himself with a katana, the main character was able to block her blow, and it became clear that her hands were not inferior in strength to metal. This very situation angered the guy, because he began to hate the fight even more, due to the fact that even his bodyguard was infected with a virus. But it was impossible to stand like this forever, so he threw her back and was going to break forward because he could not be here forever. He had many ways at his disposal to kill her quickly, but he decided to simply neutralize her and use the thunder sword technique. After the sword touched her, she was hit by a strong discharge. It shouldn't have killed her, but in order to immobilize her, it should have been enough. And so it happened after this attack, the girl fell to the ground and did not move anymore, which gave hope that she could somehow be saved. The main character stood over her and held a sword in his hands. He did not know what to do next in such a situation, because he did not want to kill her. The girl came to her senses and turned to the main character. She asked him to save her, which meant that she could still think and wanted to live. If she could talk, it meant that she was not yet completely under the control of the virus, which means there is a small chance to save her. After logging into the system, the guy started looking for an antidote for the virus, and fortunately for her, there was such a vaccine. He quickly bought it, because there was no time to waste. Holding the syringe to her hand, he told her that the vaccine could help, but whether it would help or not depends entirely on her. Fortunately, she was lucky, and the vaccine worked. The girl almost instantly regained her sanity and normal appearance, but she did not remember what happened. The main character decided not to lose this opportunity and approached the girl very close. He told her that he had saved her, and now she needed to figure out how to pay him. The girl was glad that she was saved, but she was surprised that the main character saved her, because according to the idea, he should not be here. Since now she was saved by this guy, she decided to give him a syringe with a cloudy liquid, and the main character did not know what it was for. The girl called the liquid in this syringe a strengthening potion. With its help, Drac creates zombies and creates chaos in the settlement. She was angry at her patron because he finally went crazy and made a test subject even of her, but she managed to steal this thing before she passed out. The main character accepted this gift, but this did not negate the fact that it is dangerous to use it and it will turn him into a zombie. The girl convinced the main character that this syringe would not be dangerous for him, but on the contrary would strengthen him, because the guy is strong and can handle it. Since this syringe was needed to win a fight, the main character was not happy about it, because he was sure that he would kill him on his own. While he was talking, the girl took out a knife and resolutely pointed it at her throat. She definitely wanted to kill herself. She decided to kill herself because of Drac, because she thought that he was a good leader and would lead their settlement to a bright future. So she helped him. But everything turned out completely wrong, and now she is not worthy to live. But at the last moment, when the blade almost reached the target, the main character grabbed it with his hand, cutting his fingers, and stopped him. The girl was crying and did not understand why the main character prevents her from committing suicide, because such as she is not worthy to live. To this, the main character replied that he saved her life, and now her life belongs to him, so he forbids her to die, and when he returns, he will punish her for this suicide attempt. Such words pleased the girl, and she calmed down. A slight smile appeared on her face. She agreed to his conditions and said that she would wait for him. The main character went into the depths of the laboratory, and everywhere he passed there was complete devastation, which meant that the creatures who got out of here were extremely aggressive. At the end of the corridor, a fight was waiting for him. He sat in front of a large monitor and watched people running away from zombies, but not everyone turned out. He also expected the main character. The main character did not wait long and immediately took out a sword. He told Drac that people believed him and thought that he would lead them to heaven, and he sent them straight to hell. When Drac turned around, he showed his snake head. He said it was just studying the virus. Since the human body has a limit, he is not going to stop. He decided that he would no longer be human, and after that his head went towards Ron. It was amazing how far it could stretch. But this attack was too slow, and the main character easily managed to dodge his head and cut it off with one swing. The snake's head clattered noisily on the floor, even though he was ferocious, but everything has its own strength, and his neck was not particularly hard. The main character raised his head by the hair and did not understand how this could be. He was absolutely sure that this man was not weak and the fight should be harder. And he was right, because as soon as he raised his head, it turned out that she was not dead and could quite function separately from the body. It was a surprise. Not only was it abrupt, but she also had a lot of strength. She was able to reach the neck of the main character and bite him. Tearing his head from his neck, the main character saw a headless creature standing in front of him, similar to a snake, but it had many arms and small heads. This creature attacked the main character with one of its small heads. It was approaching the main character at high speed and was in the form of a spear. And when the main character tried to dodge this attack, he realized that his body was not listening to him. It was the poison that got into him through that head. And when it seemed that the end could not be avoided, Mia appeared in front of him. She stood in front of the snake and covered the trajectory of its flight with her body. It was a human shield. The snake pierced through her side, and she grabbed her, not letting her get out back. The main character did not understand what this girl had forgotten here. She turned to him with empty eyes, and there were tears on them. Blood was leaking from her lips. She just couldn't leave the main character alone and followed him secretly. Meanwhile, the monster became three-headed, and these heads were big. Each of them spoke, and they all claimed that it was the end for these two. That's what happens when you go against a fight. And in order to finish off the wounded people, he used dozens of small snakes that were supposed to pierce through them. But this did not happen. Instead of what the serpent expected to see, he saw how all his little heads were cut off in an instant. Meanwhile, the main character was taking out a syringe with an evolution potion from his hand. Since there was a critical situation, and even a friend died, he decided to put everything on the line. After this injection, his body underwent some transformation, and his left arm was now an order of magnitude larger and more powerful, and his entire body turned red. The snake was furious. He immediately realized that this was his evolution potion, and he wanted to know where this thing came from his enemy. But while he was asking his meaningless questions, the main character jumped into the air and prepared to attack this monster. He grabbed him by one of the heads and tore it off without much effort. It was a test of new strength, because it was necessary to get used to them. The snake only confirmed that it was useless and that the main character could not kill him, since he could restore himself almost immediately. Realizing that the snake spears would not work now, Drac decided that he could dissolve the main character with poison, and threw it out of his heads. The main character decided not to shy away and just take this attack on himself, covering himself with his new hand because she had to withstand it. It was painful, but this attack did not leave any serious damage. Only smoke came from the hand, which significantly reduced the view. While the main character did not see anything, Drac decided to absorb him in order for him to become one with him. And when the smoke cleared, the main character saw a large snake head in front of him, which was definitely going to swallow him. He didn't have time to dodge this. so the snake swallowed the main character without any problems and was sure that their fight was over. That's just what he didn't know, that the main character was just waiting for this, and now a real fight was starting, not a cat-and-mouse game. The snake had time to regret his hasty decision, because after a few seconds he began to feel that something was happening inside his body. This force in his body was growing, and he did not know what to do with it. Eventually his stomach began to crack a little, which meant defeat for him. And the next moment, the main character's hand came out of his stomach, which meant that it was not possible to absorb him, and now he got out. The serpent stood with his stomach ripped open and could not understand how he lost, because he considered himself a higher being and completely absorbed the lower being, and it was able to escape. The main character decided to finish this senseless monologue of the villain and used his hand. It increased in length and grabbed the snake. After that, she began to absorb him, and in the end it turned out that the supreme being was destroyed by his own weapon and helplessly shouted that he did not agree with this. After a short period of time, there was nothing left of the snake, and the main character's hand did not really want to return to its usual size. It became clear that this force has not been mastered yet, and now his body cannot withstand such a load, and the force begins to get out of control. Since he could not allow this, he decided to use freezing, which was supposed to stop the effect of the virus. This helped, and after a few seconds the arm returned to normal. The main character helplessly collapsed to the floor and lost consciousness, because the use of such force took away all his energy. Several days have passed since the incident in the central settlement. The main character was taken to the hospital, where he was gradually recovering, but still did not recover. Although his appearance was shabby and his arm was completely broken, he was still in good condition and finally came to his senses today. Hearing his movements, the girls immediately ran to the bed. Chloe considered it a medical discovery, and Linda and Erica were just glad to wake him up. The main character was able to get out of bed and did not understand how he survived at all. It seemed like a good dream for him, but in the end he decided to find out how things were. Erica immediately began to report on the work done and reported that after Ron killed Drac, the players saved the residents. And now that all threats have been eliminated, a complete restoration of the city is being carried out, and it has been progressing at a fairly rapid pace. When the guy came to the open window, he saw a crowd of people. They all greeted him and decided to worship him as a deity for saving them. But the main character was not having fun at all, because he remembered that Mia sacrificed herself, and he wanted her to see this scene, and he still did not know her real name. And while he was standing depressed and talking about it, a slipper flew into the back of his head. And the owner of this slipper was just the same Mia. She was unharmed and was already able to recover, and with her was also Now, who held her. Seeing Mia, the main character was ready to cry again, because he actually thought that she had died then, and he would not see her again, and here she was, right in front of him, alive. She was angry at him that he forgot his promise, because they agreed to have a drink after it was over, and she also told him that he would remember her name.